of the Portland City Council on October 16th, 2019. Good afternoon, Carla. Please call the roll.
Good afternoon. Udaly?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish?
Here.
Hardesty?
Here.
Wheeler?
Here. Now we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations, will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Thank you very much. All right, the first item is 968, a land use appeal.
Appeal of the Southwest Hills Residential League against the hearings officer's decision to approve with conditions a one-lot partition with concurrent environmental and planned development review adjacent to 1315 Southwest Broadway Drive, LU 18-119056 LDP ENPD.
All right, first, the city attorney will make some announcements about today's hearing. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon again. This is an evidentiary hearing. This means that you may submit new evidence to council in support of your arguments. Order of testimony. For an evidentiary appeal hearing, we will begin with a staff report by the Bureau of Development Services staff for approximately 10 minutes. Following the staff report, City Council will hear from interested persons in the following order. The appellant will go first and will have 10 minutes to present his or her case. Following the appellant, persons who support the appeal will go next. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak to council. The principal opponent, the applicant, will have 15 minutes to address the council and rebut the appellant's presentation. If there is no principal opponent, the council will move directly to testimony from persons who oppose the appeal after supporters of the appeal conclude their testimony. After the principal opponent, the council will hear from persons who oppose the appeal. Again, each person will have 3 minutes. Finally, the appellant will have 5 minutes to rebut the presentation of the opponents to the appeal. The council may then close the hearing, deliberate, and take a vote on the appeal. If the vote is a tentative vote, the council will set a future date for the adoption of findings and a final vote on the appeal. If the council takes a final vote today, that will conclude the matter before the council. I would like to announce several guidelines for those who will be addressing the city council today. Submitting evidence into the record. Any letters or documents you wish to become part of the record should be given to the council clerk after you testify. Similarly, the original or a copy of any slides, photographs, drawings, maps, videos, or other items you show to council during your testimony, including PowerPoint presentations, should be given to the council clerk to make sure they become part of the record. Testimony must be directed to the approval criteria. Any testimony, arguments, or evidence you present must be directed toward the applicable approval criteria for this land use review or other criteria in the city's comprehensive plan or zoning code that you believe apply to the decision. BDS staff will identify the applicable approval criteria as a part of their staff report to council. Issues must be raised with specificity. You must raise an issue clearly enough to give the council and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue. If you don't, you will be precluded from appealing the issue to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. An applicant must identify constitutional challenges to conditions of approval. Additionally, if the applicant fails to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with enough specificity to allow the council to respond, the applicant will be precluded from bringing an action for damages in circuit court.
Very good. So colleagues, just a housekeeping item. I want you to be aware that I have a hard out tonight at 4:45 p.m. And I don't know what other people's schedules are. I notice after the land use item, we have a number of emergency items that I'm hoping we can get to prior to my departure.
Mayor, I had
Commissioner
intended to
Fish?
put an absence in. I don't want to have the council lose a quorum, so we'll play it by ear. But 4:30 may be the outer limit of what I can do as well.
Okay, so I have a question of legal counsel. I took a sneak peek, and it looks like there's about 50-ish people signed up to testify on this land use matter. If we give them all 3 minutes, we're going to be way over that. So the question is, can I limit that to 2 minutes?
Staff, do you know how much time you noticed did it notice how much time people would have?
In the notice, it said 3 minutes.
Yeah. So the notice did indicate that people would get 3 minutes today.
Okay, so I just want
We-
people to be on notice then, that if it's 3 minutes each, and we have 150 minutes of testimony after what will probably be at least a half an hour of presentations, there is a chance we will not get through the testimony or the hearing today. And I just want people who are signed up to be aware of that. Alternatively, what I would encourage, it's been my experience, and I'm speaking, painting with a broad brush, that testimony on these land use items tends to get very repetitive. And so if you hear testimony that you agree with, just give a big thumbs up, or maybe come to the microphone when your name is called and say, all my points have been made, but I want to be very clear, I'm either for the appeal or I'm against the appeal, and maybe summarize your comments. Not everybody has to speak for the full 3 minutes. And that would just be my personal admonition and request. Commissioner Fritz.
There is an hour and 20 minutes of additional hearings that have been asked for this afternoon.
Yeah.
So if we were to get through them all, it would likely to get it to 5:20. And I'm hearing that you can't stay.
I must leave at 4:45.
Commissioner Fish needs to,
Well,
Commissioner
so we can do
Hardesty.
the emergencies perhaps first.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
If the council, sorry, Commissioner Hardesty, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead. If the council decides to continue the hearing and leave the record open to provide additional written testimony, we can consolidate the oral
Yeah,
testimony today.
okay, so we'll worry about that when we get there. Commissioner Hardesty?
I tell you, we have fabulous legal counsel because she anticipated those were the words coming
I
out of my
interrupted, I'm
mouth.
sorry.
Excellent.
And answered them before I asked. Thank you.
All right, very good. So first off, do any members of the city council wish to declare a conflict of interest? No members of the council have a conflict of interest to declare. Do any members of the council have ex parte contacts to declare or information gathered outside of this hearing to disclose?
No.
Other than a staff briefing, I have no ex parte contacts to disclose. Have any members of the council made any visits to the sites involved in this matter?
I have traveled along Broadway Drive in my time, 30 years here, but not specifically related to this hearing.
Yeah, ditto. Do any council members have any other matters that need to be discussed before we begin the hearing? Very good. We'll start with the staff report. 10 minutes. Come on up. Good afternoon.
I appreciate the ties. We like it when people put ties on to come talk to us.
Oh, yeah, okay. Sweet,
If you're tireless, you're also welcome.
thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sean Burgett. I'm a city planner with BDS who worked on this land use review being presented to the council today. My colleague, Stacy Castleberry, a senior planner with BDS, is behind me. This will be an evidentiary hearing. New information can be submitted. As background, the hearings officer approved the applicant's proposal on the 4.6 acre site, which included a plan development review, environmental review, and land division review. The hearings officer approved a 1.33 acre parcel that will accommodate 20 new dwelling units, 10 sets of attached units via the plan development review. Access to the site is proposed from Southwest Tangent Street, and the environmental review approved a 3.27 acre environmental resource tract that will provide environmental protection at the site. The hearings officer also approved a new public pedestrian path, built to trail standards connecting Southwest Tangent Street to Southwest Broadway Drive, and minor improvements along the south side of Broadway Drive opposite the subject site. This slide shows the applicable approval criteria in the zoning code which the hearings officer based his decision on. The appellant, the Southwest Hills Residential League, has based their appeal on transportation impacts, rights-of-ways, and Title 17 as indicated in the slide. The appellant's primary concerns are related to lack of improvements required along the north side of Southwest Broadway Drive adjacent to the subject site. The zoning map here depicts the site area. The site is zoned single-family residential R10 with an environmental conservation zoning overlay. Southwest Tangent Street abuts the site's northwest corner, and Southwest Broadway Drive abuts the site's southern property boundary. Here's an aerial view of the site showing kind of the forested canopy that exists there today. Here's the proposed lot layout overview. The yellow highlights parcel 1, where new development is proposed. The green represents the environmental resource tract around parcel 1. And the light green represents the location of the pedestrian path connection between Southwest Tangent and Southwest Broadway Drive. I also want to quickly show some slides related to the development proposed on Lot 1 as approved via the Plan Development Review, which allowed the applicant to cluster the development proposed on one lot in order to lessen the impacts to the environmental zone. This is opposed to having detached dwelling units on individual lots. The private driveway proposed includes guest parking, a turnaround that meets Fire Bureau requirements, and pedestrian improvements along the private drive. Here's some conceptual renderings of the new units of this proposed on the site. Southwest Broadway Drive is partially visible in the slide. Here's some conceptual renderings of the new units from west of the site. And this is a conceptual rendering of the new private driveway entering the site from Southwest Broadway or Southwest Tangent Street. Here's a photo of Southwest Broadway Drive looking west. You can see the arrow pointing to the subject site. Here's another photo of Southwest Broadway Drive facing northwest. So here are the city council alternatives today based on the appeal. And I also wanted to note some new information that was submitted. It was basically put on the record following the hearings officer's decision and the appeal. The applicant initiated a public works review process in correlation with PBOT and BES in order to explore additional pedestrian improvements along the south side of Southwest Broadway Drive, which have received concept approval. Therefore, I want to allow PBOT staff that's here today to step in and to discuss the requirements regarding this proposal. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Kurt Kruger with the City Department of Transportation. I'm an engineer with the City of Portland. Sean can walk through some slides, but to speed this up, I'll let him walk through those slides as I walk through my comments. I don't typically put these comments in writing, but I want to make it very clear. You're going to hear about legal matters, constitutionality, and some other issues today. And I want my comments as a transportation representative to be focused on this particular site and not as it may apply to other development actions throughout the city. So that's why I want to make sure I got these comments down. I want to first start out by familiarizing yourself with the project and more specifically on the existing conditions of Southwest Broadway Drive along the project's 740 feet of street frontage along this roadway. You're going to hear significant testimony from both the applicant and appellant regarding the condition, constraints, safety, and level of appropriate improvements that should or shouldn't be required along this corridor with the proposed development. As I said a couple minutes ago, I'm an engineer. I'm not a land use attorney, but it has become vitally important to my team and I that we become very familiar with case law surrounding property takings and exactions. I want to take a minute to give you a short excerpt from the U.S. Supreme Court decision, Dolan versus the City of Tigard. It states, if the court finds that a nexus exists, then the court must determine whether the city has shown a rough proportionality between the exactions and the projected impact of the proposed development. That is, while no precise mathematical calculation is required, the city must make some sort of individualized determination that the permit conditions are related both in nature and extent to the impact of the proposed development. I just want to reiterate, the court did not give us a formula, a book, a calculation of how we determine this. It's an individualized determination on a site-by-site basis. It is important for City Council to understand that not only does a development application need to comply with locally adopted zoning codes, which the hearings officer has found to be the case, but development conditions and exactions that the city imposes must pass this constitutional taking test of rough proportionality. PBOT, in coordination with the Bureau of Environmental Service, has struggled from day one on finding the appropriate requirements for improvements along Southwest Broadway Drive, balancing our city standards and the lawful requirements that will pass the court tests. Our Public Works Appeals Committee met and discussed 3 public works alternatives before we landed on the requirements that were included in the hearings officer's decision. PBOT originally required standard half-street improvements, including bike lanes and sidewalks. It didn't take long to realize that significant retaining walls, off-site sewer extensions, conflicts with the environmental zone were going to preclude standard street improvements. The required improvements to Broadway Drive are currently under engineering review and are less than what the Bureau would like to see on a street that is intended to serve pedestrians, bicycles, and motor vehicles. But is a set of requirements that do not step over the line that would trigger much larger scale infrastructure development that would likely not satisfy the constitutionality standards. The conditions surrounding Broadway Drive are not unique to Broadway Drive. Nearly all 25 neighborhood collectors in Southwest Portland are asked to serve the needs of pedestrians, bicycles, and motorists, but are some of the most costly streets to improve and are very difficult to engineer and construct one development at a time. Unlike an infill lot on a quiet residential street or a street with better sight lines found in flatter areas of the city, isolated improvements on a street like Broadway Drive are difficult to permit and construct, as utility and bike and ped infrastructure needs to connect on either end to provide a functional facility. Capitol Highway, for example, currently under design, has been discussed and desired to be improved for nearly 20 years, currently at a cost of over $20 million. Broadway Drive has more significant topographical constraints and a greater length that would result in an even higher price tag to deliver. The improvements that the city has imposed include right-of-way dedication to allow for more complete improvements in the future, along with improvements to the existing conditions that will somewhat improve the pedestrian experience along the distance of the site's frontage. In closing, both the city staff report to the hearings officer and the hearings officer's decision found that the development application met the approval criteria of the Portland zoning code, while also not resulting in conditions that would not meet constitutional standards. I'm available now and throughout the hearing to answer any of your questions.
Could I ask you a common sense question here? So this issue of proportionality, just so I understand it in layman's terms, the concern you're expressing based on case law, based on the constitutionality, is if the conditions of development are out of proportion economically with the value of the project or the cost of the project, that constitutes potentially a land taking. Is that your concern? Explain it to me in simple layman's terms so I get it.
There are 3 primary court cases that set the table for this conversation. The first, I don't think anybody's going to disagree, is met. It's the nexus test. We have a legitimate interest of having a Broadway Drive developed to a larger standard. The next is the Dolan case, where we have to find some way of saying, if we're going to take somebody's property for a governmental interest, we have to show that what the impacts of the project are going to put into the system are proportional to what we're asking of their property.
And when you say asking of their property, do you mean in a financial sense?
So the first sense would be we're physically going to require them to dedicate some of their land to become public right-of-way.
Okay.
The way we have typically done that in transportation, and jurisdictions around the country have struggled with this, is we measure vehicle trips to and from the site and compare that to how many vehicles are on Broadway Drive, for example, and we come up with a percentage of impact. And then we compare the percentage of their land and how much we might be exacting. So the courts didn't set that table for us, but absent a formula or a book or some table, that's a quantifiable method of calculation for us. The third test, and the city attorney can always interrupt me if I misstate this, went one step further and said, financial exactions from an applicant are now part of the takings test. And this was a case that came out about 2.5 years ago. So to answer your question, when we're asking for improvements, those improvements come with a monetary value and they have to be proportional to what the development is proposing. with 20 units that is also building a new street to serve those units, and the extreme constraints of building standard improvements on Broadway Drive, absent a formula, I think it's, in your words, a layman's look at, it's not going to be proportional to ask for, and I don't want to put numbers into the record because they're not cooked or baked or figured out yet. It is going to be a very, very costly street to build, and having the burden placed on the development for 20 units probably isn't going to pass that test.
And the consequence of not passing the test is this would be, potentially appealed to LUBA,
So
Land Use Board of Appeals?
what's before you today is, did this meet the zoning code, which the hearings officer recommended it did, or decided it did? If the council were to disagree with staff and disagree with the hearings officer and say more improvement should be required, the concern would be we ask too much and it goes to LUBA, and then it could go to the Court of Appeals and then on to the Supreme Court.
That makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate that description.
And Mr.
Commissioner Daley,
Krieger,
and then Commissioner Hardesty.
thank you, Mayor. You said that you didn't want to enter numbers into the record because they may not be completely baked. I am curious if you could share the impact of those the estimated impact of those 20 units on the roadway? Or is that one of those numbers that we
Let me
can't?
make sure I understand the question. Is there a dollar amount that we can assign to the impacts that the
No,
development?
not a dollar
Okay.
amount, the percentage of increase of traffic. You
Okay,
said
that I can do. Broadway Drive, again, is unique. You don't just drive up Broadway Drive and turn into a street and end up in the subdivision. There are a couple access points depending on where you're coming from. So if you're coming from downtown, you would access a street at the lower end of the hill. If you were coming from the west side, Beaverton, you would probably take another street. It's very difficult to figure out how many cars are actually going to be traversing across Broadway Drive in front of this property. Our best calculation is about 60 new vehicle trips per day. There's about 4,000 and some currently on Broadway Drive today. So it's less than 1% or
Than
so.
1%.
It's
Thank
very
you.
small.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to take the mayor's question to a conclusion. So if LUBA got this case and they ruled against us, then it would trigger a state law that would basically say that we've taken this developer's land. Is that an accurate statement?
I'll let the city attorney correct me if I'm wrong here, but what likely happened is LUBA, if they found that we overreached and didn't agree with your decision, if you were to uphold the appeal, would likely remand it back to the city to correct the mistake that they would have identified us making. So we would probably be back here again redoing this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Was there more to your presentation?
No.
Very good. All right, next we'll have the appellant for 10 minutes. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here.
How are you?
Good.
Can a technical person help me move off of the city? Oh, thank you.
Carla to the rescue. And if you could also just, when you speak, if you could just enter your names for the record, please.
My name is, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Lisa Caballero, and I am the Transportation League for the Southwest Hills Residential League.
Thank you.
We are appealing the hearings officer decision on the grounds that it accepted a mitigation plan which fails to provide pedestrians with a safer walkway and releases the applicant from code-required frontage improvements. This summer, PBOT presented to Council PED-PDX and Vision Zero plans, and we learned a lot about walking in Portland. I think we all agree to the aspirations and goals in these plans. We all want Portland to be a safer place to walk. But it is in this type of hearing with a real street, a real developer, and a real set of neighbors that plans and aspirations can become a reality. In this hearing, you all have the authority to take a concrete step today towards making Portland a safer place to walk. Let's keep it there for now. The PED-PDX report states, per city charter and city code, property owners are responsible for constructing, maintaining, and repairing the sidewalks abutting their property. Traditionally, the requirement to construct sidewalks is triggered when a development is proposed. As part of the development, property owners must construct or improve the sidewalks fronting their property. This is how the vast majority of sidewalks have historically been built in Portland. That's a clear layman's statement of Portland sidewalk policy and code. It's not something that PED-PDX made up. It's not new. This is common knowledge and understanding of city code that is repeated regularly by city employees. If every new development improves their frontage, then eventually a street gets a continuous sidewalk. In theory, this policy can work, but only if the city consistently enforces its code and makes developers provide these frontage improvements parcel by parcel. The grounds for our appeal are narrow. Please understand that there is a significant qualitative legal difference between a frontage requirement and an off-site mitigation. A requirement is strict and defined. A mitigation has no bottom. It is a slippery slope to nothing. You can see the frontage improvements bounce down this slope in the city's responses to the applicant's 3 alternative requests for relief from frontage improvements. Here's PBOT's March 2018 response to the early assistant request. The proposed subdivision will also trigger standard frontage improvement. A 12-foot dedication will be required, curb located 16 feet from the center line, an 8-foot swale, and a 6-foot sidewalk. I agree with Mr. Kruger, we can't do that. Next, the applicant requests relief from the frontage requirements in an alternative review, and in July 2018, the committee responds, the committee is supportive of reducing the standard sidewalk requirements to a minimum of a 6-foot wide paved shoulder for the length of the property. The applicant comes back a second time requesting relief from frontage requirements, and in December 2018, the committee responds, the committee is not able to support the applicant's request to eliminate the 6-foot wide paved shoulder. PBOT has already reduced our standard sidewalk improvements along this frontage. Broadway is a neighborhood collector and a city walkway, and the required shoulder widening will provide a minimum of stable surface for pedestrian circulation. But finally, in a third review in 2019, the city relieves the applicant of the frontage improvements and in their place recommends a mitigation which would have no effect on pedestrian or cyclist safety and only requires improvements, quote, where feasible. The applicant will also be required to provide gravel shoulder improvements to the south side of Broadway where feasible, given the existing constraints of driveways, mechanical equipment, and guardrail locations. Constraints which make the shoulder as narrow as 3 feet in places. This is the first slide. Okay, that is what 3 feet of shoulder looks like. And this is getting towards the end of their west end frontage. You'll see that this shoulder is already partially paved. So the danger to the pedestrian is not from the surface that they're walking on. I don't care if it's dirt or asphalt. The danger comes from the cars that are whizzing by. And these are constraints. We have a guardrail, we have a utility cabinet, we have a telephone pole. At the bottom, you'll see an old cement plug from a guardrail from the 60s. And on the left, this is actually a good picture of one of the wider shoulders. This is about 5 feet right here, and you'll see that the asphalt pulls over about halfway. The proposed mitigation that's being presented to you today is to pull that asphalt further to the right so that's covering more of the gravel. That is the improvement that they're proposing for 20 luxury townhouse units. Okay, it's not an improvement, it's just spending money. And then I want you to notice up in the top corner, there's a little scooter parked in back of that car. We have people commuting by e-scooter up Broadway now. Thank you very much. In improving this project, the hearings officer sets a precedent of not requiring frontage improvements or effectively mitigating for them. This is a standard which can be applied anywhere in the city. I return my remaining time over to our counsel, Mr. Daniel Kearns.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Daniel Cairns. I'm a land use lawyer. I represent the Southwest Hills Residential League in this case. And I submitted a memo twice. So the one that has some of my points says corrected on the beginning of it. But let me begin with as you saw staff's presentation, this was a very complicated project with e-zoning, and it evolved over many years, and it's a huge credit to the developer and to staff that it boils down to this one issue today. There were, believe me, 1,000 points of light going through this whole process. But the issue that this presents to you today is a very common one with infill projects that come in on the city's existing infrastructure system, street system, that has inadequacies. And you have adopted recently and over a long period of time a large number of these bicycle pedestrian safety policies. It is a huge priority for you. You have said so, and your citizens have devoted thousands of hours volunteering on the Planning Sustainability Commission and various other advisory boards to help you promulgate these policies. And what we're asking for you to do today is enforce them. You have codified these policies, in this case, in your code, and this development vested on a prior version of the code. And the standard I quoted in the appeal notice, it's 33.641.020. The transportation system must be capable of safely supporting the proposed development in addition to the existing uses in the area. Then you have a list of factors to consider. It concludes with safety for all modes. And I think that really characterizes your policies that you've adopted, and the next section of the code provides for mitigation, to impose mitigation so that a development can achieve these standards. And this isn't the first time you've faced this kind of a case. You did not too long ago in McAdam Ridge, where you interpreted that code provision to say all the relevant approval criteria must be met. There's nothing in the language of the section I quoted or the purpose statement that allows for making an on balance finding that failure of one or more of the evaluation factors is not a basis for denial. They all have to be met. And in that case, if you recall, it was access to a TriMet stop across the street. And the developer said, the improvements required to make this safe are disproportional to the impact of this project. Staff and the council and the applicant couldn't come to an agreement on a range of mitigating conditions, so you denied it. It didn't meet that approval standard, so you denied it. And so the present case, the hearings officer found, similar to you, that it's not safe. The hearings officer finds, this is his language, that the transportation system, except for Southwest Broadway Drive, is capable and does currently provide safe pedestrian bicycle access. The hearings officer agrees that the section of Broadway Drive adjacent to the site is nearly impassable, at least not safely, by pedestrians and bicycles. So there's the basis for the mitigation or a denial, which is what you need. The applicant has suggested a couple cases that control here. The first one is Brown versus the City of Medford. And that plus the City Hill versus City of Portland are both nexus cases, not disproportionality. So in the Medford case, the court said the issue is whether the exactions substantially advance the same interest that the land use authorities assert would allow them to deny the permit altogether. The hearings officer skipped over that part when he found it wasn't safe and approved it without the mitigation that would be required to make it safe. And so we're asking that there be mitigation to make it safe. The Hill case that you lost, in that case, you found that it was safe for all modes. So it doesn't really, that's why you lost it. In this one, in this particular instance, we're not asking for the full smorgasbord of right-of-way improvements. And that's what the hearings officer analyzed. He said full standard improvements are disproportionate. That's 12-foot shoulder, a giant retaining wall. What we have suggested is much cheaper. 6 feet of shoulder, a much shorter retaining wall, and some kind of barrier to make it safe.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt for one moment? So you're at the 10 minutes, but here's what we do in the interest of fairness. I don't really want to cut you off. How much more time do you think you need to finish your remarks?
30 seconds.
Okay, we'll let you finish, and then we'll add that same amount to the principal opponent's time, just in the interest of fairness.
So
Go
I
ahead
guess
and continue.
kind of to respond to Commissioner Hardesty's question, what would LUBA do with this? It depends what you do with it. So you could affirm the hearings officer, approve this project when it's
documented, not safe for bikes and pedestrians, contrary to your policies. You could require full street improvements. That would be, I think, disproportionate, or require the narrower standards that we've suggested. The applicant, the only evidence in the record about the cost is $700,000. That's less than the purchase price of one of these units, one of these houses, and for example, the street into the project. They have to provide streets into their project anyway. That doesn't really count. They have to provide water to their own houses. So the narrower standard is definitely in the rough proportionality range and would pass muster under Dolan. But more importantly, under Nolan, your final option is to deny the project.
Let me ask you something, counsel. Does it make any difference to your argument that the development is not, strictly speaking, adjacent to Southwest Broadway, or that the vehicle usage impact on Southwest Broadway is negligible?
Vehicles aren't the issue. These aren't vehicle trip generation, and Mr. Kruger talked about how engineers calculate this. These are pedestrians and bicycles, and you don't have any model for calculating impact based on bicycles and pedestrians. That's the issue here. It's not a car traffic safety issue. But in terms of contribution of trips to here, I think the applicant's engineer estimated that 1.7% of the trips on Broadway would be attributable to this project. That's small. 3 to 5% of the site trips would be by walking. It's small, but it's there. And the applicant says, well, there's virtually no pedestrian traffic on Broadway now. That's because it's too dangerous. But they're building a pedestrian path from the top that would drain this development as well as the neighborhood down to Broadway Drive. That's a big issue. And even the hearings officer said the pedestrian path changes how this project impacts Broadway Drive and its safety deficiencies. It contributes pedestrian trips to Broadway Drive. Even in the hearings officer said, I don't understand why anyone would want to cross Broadway Drive. Maybe that's because he tried. It's a very dangerous street to cross, but your policies say make it safe. Make developers improve their own frontages. This project does abut this road.
Commissioner Fritz?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, your preferred outcome is not that we deny the application. The preferred outcome is to change the conditions of approval to apply to provide more pedestrian and bike safety on Broadway Drive.
Yes. We worked hard to come up with a smaller standard that would work. And it won't fix the entire Broadway Drive. I mean, Mr. Kruger told you how terrible it is. This is just one
I'm
piece.
further hearing that you're not asking for full street improvements with 12-foot.
We think that would be a bit much at this point in time.
Is there a concern with the pedestrian path other than how it interacts with Broadway Drive?
Well, it is going to be a big conduit if it ever becomes somewhat safe.
But was there any elements of your appeal that is focused on the pedestrian path itself?
Can I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
I just want to interject that the pedestrian path that is crossing the property is a mitigation or in lieu of a connectivity requirement. It is not the frontage requirement, so we haven't really addressed it at all. It's confusing because it is a pedestrian amenity, but it's done instead of a road, which would be too difficult to build from Davenport down to Broadway.
But
So
that's
no,
not,
we don't address
that's
it.
not the focus of your appeal. Okay, that's
No.
It's a good thing.
and it has a public easement on it. That's my understanding.
Yes.
Is that correct?
It'll be
Thank you.
public right away.
Commissioner Hardesty? and Commissioner
Thank you.
Daly.
So I think you are accurate when you say that we passed a law that has this vision of where we're moving as far as every part of the city having access to sidewalks and bike paths, et cetera, et cetera. I think what I'm struggling with is this is 20 units that are not on Broadway, that the developer is being required to put another road in order for folks to be able to access the property. And it sounds like it sounds like the neighborhood association wants them to actually do above and beyond because of poor planning in the past that actually didn't create sidewalks and bike path and et cetera, right? So Southwest and East Portland have the same problem, right? Not a lot of lights, not a lot of sidewalks, not a lot of bike paths, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're asking us to say, okay, because now we have this new policy, this one developer with 20 properties should actually fix the whole area. Well, a big piece of the area, not the whole area.
The whole area was described by Mr. Kruger, and it's just this segment. And the city, as you know, all quarters of the city have deficiencies. And the way you start to build out, to fix, to fill in the gaps, is you make developers improve their own properties, their own frontages. We're not asking for off-site improvements, although one mitigation that would probably help a lot is the intersection of Hoffman and Broadway, because right now a lot of people walk there and it's sort of a death trap. But that's how cities, and you in particular, you make developers, property by property, build out their frontages. And a lot of times developers say, hey, that's a sidewalk to nowhere.
Right.
Well, it is today, but we have these plans, and we are requiring systematically that developers build out, build out, build out, and eventually you get where you need to be, but you've got to start. Otherwise, it's general fund. And that's the entire city's fund for paying for those improvements. When you have a chance, you make developers improve their own properties. So it is not above and beyond. It's very basic, it's very simple, it's very standard.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you've mostly answered my questions. I'm finding the maps we have somewhat inadequate because one of my questions was, and that's not your fault, if this would create any kind of contiguous walkway, and it sounds like no.
We'll be presenting a map, the public testimony. Actually,
Great.
north and downhill of this. In the past, it's been the policy that new development has been required to build cement sidewalks, and we have many, I think 5 or 6 sidewalks to nowhere that are actually kind of connected enough that people are walking. We do have in sight a connected, continuous path all the way from this frontage to downtown Portland. You can see it.
I feel like I should disclose that we took the same transportation and traffic class together, and we're both painfully aware of how bad decisions made decades ago impact us to this very day, and then you add the unique terrain in the Southwest Hills, and it's very challenging, but I appreciate this. I'm just trying to, as Transportation Commissioner, my ears perked up when you talked about increased pedestrian activity on this road. And I want to know that people will be safe, and the potential impact of the pedestrian pathway you're talking about. So, thank you.
I'm curious if there's been any outreach to the principal opponents of the appeal with the proposal you just asked us to consider?
The developer, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, in fact, they did kind of a cost estimate, and that's in the record, and they said it was $700,000. They anticipated very tall walls, the entire length of it, which isn't the case if it was only 6 feet of shoulder. So that's what they came back with a no.
Okay, thank you.
Just
Commissioner Fritz.
As long as it's safe, walkable, bikeable, you would be amenable to some kind of an alternative treatment like a boardwalk?
Would what?
Would you be amenable to an alternative surface rather than paving, such as a boardwalk?
If it's bikeable and walkable.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the uphill slope, and people will testify and they'll have pictures of actually how it works, but it's the uphill slope. So bikes are not going very fast, that's part of the problem, but so something other than a paved surface is fine if you're not zipping down. The downhill slope, gravel would be a dangerous thing for bicycles.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up are supporters of the appeal. 3 minutes each. How many do we have signed up?
I think we have about 19.
Okay, and again, my earlier admonition rings true. It's quality, not quantity. So if you hear people saying what you want to hear, you can just raise your hand or come up to the
Carly, could
mic
you-
and
could
say
you
it's
pull
already
up
been heard.
The first three?
Yeah, the first three are John Newman, Charlie Van Rosen, and Nancy Seaton.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to see you again, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. Thanks for this opportunity. My name is John Newman, and I'm the Vice President of the Southwest Hills Residential League. I'd like to introduce our coordinated.
Residential League, is that what you said?
Yes, Southwest Hills Residential League.
And is that different than the neighborhood association?
We are the designated neighborhood association.
Thank you.
And I'd like to introduce our coordinated testimony by showing a couple of maps that will help orient you to the neighborhood, and I think bring up some of the issues that Commissioner Udaley and Hardesty are talking about. So what we have here is a map that shows the southern part of the city. We have downtown, and then we have the Portland Heights Southwest Hills neighborhood. Broadway Drive that we're talking about is in red, and it's the eastern artery out of our neighborhood. Vista to the north is in blue, and that's our route to 23rd and Burnside. It also provides access down to Goose Hollow and the Max. Vista does have a continuous sidewalk along the eastern edge of it. Lower Montgomery is in orange, and it's a vehicular route downtown. There is no pedestrian access along here. There is a passable shoulder for part of the way, but around a chicane, it becomes inaccessible. Patton is our western route out of the city. There is no pedestrian usage on Patton. It's quite dangerous to walk on. All of these streets that you see highlighted see a lot of cut-through traffic during commuting hours. This is people trying to get around the tunnel, basically, so they come through the neighborhood and try to get downtown to the east side, or I-5, 405. I would like to add that we have very poor bus service in the Southwest Hills. Commissioner Fritz discovered this when she was trying to come to one of our neighborhood association meetings. We have a commuter bus, the 51. It runs along Vista, the blue line here, and it only runs in the morning and mornings and evenings. There is no midday service, and there's no weekend service. So none of us here today from the neighborhood were able to take the bus. We would have had to leave the home at 9 a.m. in the morning. Also notice that these streets all terminate in different areas of downtown, but that Broadway Drive offers the most direct access to the Transit Mall and to PSU and into downtown. If we zoom to the next map, this will provide you some more context along Broadway Drive. And as you can see, the blue portions are existing sidewalk cements. As Lisa said, these are pieces of sidewalks that have been required by PBOT for previous developers. The blue area is right away of on-street parking that is sort of passable for pedestrians. The blue area is the development, and the dotted line represents the frontage along Broadway where this pedestrian passage would go, and you can see how it basically begins to create a contiguous passageway along the southern area of Broadway Drive. The last thing I want to say is that, well, I'm out of time, so I'm good. Thank you.
Well, if you have one sentence or two.
I just wanted to say that Vista has a contiguous sidewalk, and it's used continuously throughout the day. We see students going down to school. We have one restaurant in the neighborhood, but we see employees walking up to the restaurant. When there's Timbers games, people are walking down to the game, and on the weekends, we see people from all over the city with backpacks on hiking up to Council Crest. So, yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor and City Commissioners. My name is Charlie Van Rossen. I am the Equity and Inclusion Chair for Southwest Hills Residential League. Portland Department of Transportation produced an equity matrix map that ranks areas of Portland that helps guide PBOT in achieving citywide racial equity goals and strategies. The equity matrix is based on census tract data on race, income, and English proficiency. The Bureau's goal is to make areas that measure high on the equity matrix a priority for achieving greater mobility for those residents, including safer walking and biking areas and greater access to public transportation. Broadway Drive, adjacent to the Tangent Project, is one of the most unsafe and mobility-deficient areas in all of Portland. I know because I drive this road almost every day to and from work. Shoulders are non-existent. Curves block drivers' views as they turn and suddenly confront bicyclists, and vehicles far exceed the speed limit, particularly on this section of the road. Because PBOT's equity matrix map is based on large census tracts, the map averages away smaller pockets of equity priority groups in the Southwest Hills. The effect is to obscure areas like Lower Southwest Broadway Drive. PBOT produced the draft Southwest in Motion plan, which shows a more granular analysis of Portland Southwest Hills, focusing on renters and those with disabilities. It captures nuances like Southwest Broadway Drive, which shows as a higher priority for addressing equitable mobility. This section of road has a high concentration of multi-unit housing that serves the Portland State campus. Many residents walk to downtown and PSU. Adding more multi-unit properties will increase foot traffic and increase risks and dangers to walkers and bicyclists. Not addressing the issue of road improvement for non-vehicular transportation will increase the likelihood of an accident and endanger residents. As I indicated, I drive this section of road almost daily. I used to bike up Broadway Drive from downtown when I was in my 20s and 30s, when I was less risk adverse, but I will not do it now. I still bike to work sometimes during the summer, but use the safer route up Montgomery Drive. My commute is 2.7 miles using Broadway Drive and is 3.4 if I use Montgomery. No public transportation goes down or up Broadway. My commute via bus would be 38 minutes as I traverse downtown and then take the only bus that goes up Southwest Vista to the Southwest Hills. The people who live and will be living along this section of Broadway do not have the comfort of any public transportation and must either walk up to Vista or downtown to connect. Addressing the issue of mobility along this section of Broadway Drive now is the right thing to do and the safest for all Portlanders.
Thank you, and I just have to acknowledge, that's a really hard bike ride. Good for you.
That was when I was doing
That's not an
triathlon.
easy one. Good afternoon.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Nancy Seaton. I'm the past president of SWIRL and current land use chair. Today I'll present the data from a traffic speed study which the city conducted for 3 days between May 19th and 22nd of this year. Yes, ma'am.
Nancy, and the mic can move. It slides around, so if it's easier, just to pull it. There you go.
She's doing the slides. The study is relevant to this hearing because vehicle speed affects pedestrian and bicyclist safety and should inform the design of frontage improvements. The city recorded car speed at 2 points marked A and B on the map. Point A is just uphill from the intersection of Southwest Hoffman and Southwest Broadway Drive, the site of a 2-car crash last week that required 2 tow trucks. Point B is about 500 feet downhill from the beginning of the proposed Tangent Village frontage and is a good indicator of how quickly cars pass that site. At point B, you can see that 92% of eastbound downhill drivers exceed the speed limit of 25 miles per hour. 27% of them exceed it by 10 miles an hour or 35 miles per hour. 10 miles per hour can be the difference between life and death for a pedestrian, as PBOT's Vision Zero program reports. According to Vision Zero, 80% of pedestrians struck by a car traveling at 40 miles per hour will be severely injured or killed. Note that uphill, fewer drivers, only 13%, exceed the limit by 10 miles per hour. This is a strong argument for putting pedestrians and cyclist facilities along the uphill westbound lane. Furthermore, a car traveling uphill can stop more quickly than one going downhill. And obviously, cyclists going uphill travel more slowly and need extra space. Consistent with those facts, the draft Southwest in Motion plan recommends that on constrained streets with only enough width for a sidewalk on one side, like Southwest Broadway Drive, the improved shoulder be placed next to the uphill traffic lane. That's from the draft Southwest in Motion plan, page 26. Those are strong reasons to support the uphill north shoulder frontage of the proposed development as the safest location for an improved shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you. Next 3, please, Carla.
Sorry, the next 3 are Mickey Goodridge, Robert DeVoisen, and Roger Brown.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. My name's Mickey Goodrich. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Air Force, and I'm a hospital administrator and a current service-disabled veteran-owned small business owner, and I live on Broadway Drive. And I just wanted to let you guys know that I live 0.4 miles from downtown Portland, which should be a great gateway to downtown area for myself, my family, and the hundreds of residents in our Southwest Hills neighborhood. The reality is, my wife and my daughter and I moved into Broadway Drive in 2017. My daughter attends Portland State University. She's a autism spectrum disorder 23-year-old and has significant challenges, especially with physical activity. So walking down the hill and walking back up the hill is challenging enough. But for the first year of her tenure at Portland State University, she and my wife diligently tried day and night and in the rain and in the elements that we deal with every day to walk up and down Portland State University so that she can go to class. My daughter requires one of us to take her most places, but she definitely requires our attention to detail walking up and down Broadway Drive to Portland State. So I just wanted to let you know that on the afternoon of May 23rd, my wife and my daughter were walking down to go to Portland State, and my wife slipped and fell on the gravel and really hurt herself. My daughter really was terrified of the cars that were coming down that day as well. And she told me in her words that she'll never walk that street again because she was nearly hit by several cars and they were speeding down, and it really terrified her. And so I'm here to tell you today that my family's 0.4 miles away from Portland State and downtown, but we don't even feel safe enough to walk down the street. So twice a day I've got to drive her down and go down the hill with her and bring her back safely. And it's just an impact that affects my little family. And I'll just have to tell you, in my 25 years of Air Force service, I've never seen a more unsafe street in my life. I mean, this is a really difficult area for us because we just try to make use of the pedestrian pathways, and we're physically unable to. And so we just would love your attention to help families like mine, very prototypical of those in the Portland area that try to do the right thing and use less car traffic. And anyhow, I appreciate your attention today.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your service, sir. Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. My name is Robert Duvoisin. I live near the top of Southwest Broadway Drive for almost 2 decades. 11 years ago, I started commuting to work on an electric bike. I think I might have been one of the first persons on the hill to do that.
I was going to say 11 years ago, yes.
Yes, it's a Chinese bike. They used it before we did.
It's been an import, yeah.
Today, I see a lot of people on e-bikes, especially in the West Hills, because it makes them accessible to more people for obvious reasons. I'm in my 60s now, and I ride every day, rain or shine, up Markham Hill, not Broadway Drive. I wouldn't dare. Broadway Drive is too dangerous. But that's not something I would be doing without the help of a motor. And so I think if we want to think about the future of the climate and making our effort, I think the increasing use of e-bikes is important. And for that, we need to provide them the space to ride safely, including on roads which perhaps a decade ago were off limits to most of, to people who aren't athletic. As you were saying, it's pretty hard, Southwest Broadway Drive. So going downhill, we can usually take the lane and travel about the speed of cars. But uphill is a different matter. And so I think that we need at least 3 feet to the right of the fog line so that I feel comfortable that the cars are a little bit further away from me when I'm going uphill. And I think it's in the plan of doing that for Markham Hill Drive, where I'll be. I'm looking forward to that. It doesn't need to be a dedicated lane. It just needs to be a little bit of space that we can share with pedestrians. My motor isn't very strong, and I don't go much faster than pedestrians going uphill. And so Portland 2035 Comprehensive Plan gives walking and biking top priority over other transportation modes, priority over cars and public transit. I'm not sure I agree with necessarily that. I think public transport is very important. But I urge you to respect this prioritization and require the frontage improvements to pedestrians and cyclists along the uphill north shoulder so that we can feel a bit safer. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Honorable Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Roger Brown. I am a resident of the Southwest Hills neighborhood and a recent addition to the Swirl Board, just less than a year now. I would like to premise my comments on the fact that I've been a longtime bicycle commuter, over 20 years now, and I live only one block off of Broadway Drive, and yet I do not take Broadway into or out of town because of safety concerns. I believe the frontage improvements for this Tangent Village development should be on the north side of Broadway. And in my opinion, the proposed mitigation to avoid displacement is not adequate. For narrow streets where improvements can only be added to one side of the road, the industry standard is to add a shared shoulder adjacent to the uphill lane. And in this case, that would be the north side of Broadway. And I feel the proposed mitigation of minor improvements to the south side, well, it would not improve cycling safety at all and would not really significantly improve pedestrian safety. So on a different note, I wanted to relay information that the Friends of Markham Nature Park has discussed regarding the proposed Tangent Village. It's because I am a board member, longtime board member of that organization. The proposed development is to include that trail that was mentioned that connects Tangent Street to Broadway, which in turn would come to a point very near where Markham Park abuts Broadway Drive. Because of this, the Friends Group sees a very exciting opportunity for connecting a whole new neighborhood with direct walking access to the park, where none really exists today. With construction of a short spur trail, it would be possible to connect into the existing trail network into the park. Now, we're not suggesting that the Tangent Village project take this on, but the Friends Group is really willing to assist in this effort. And what is doubly exciting about this possible connection into the park is that this is a part of the neighborhood, as mentioned earlier, that has some of the highest density and highest equity scores, with a number of apartment buildings where residents could easily walk to the frontage improvements. And as this is a demographic that's not typically well served for access to natural areas, we see great potential here. However, while we are excited by this prospect, it would only be supported if it were a safe connecting walkway along Broadway. So in conclusion, I urge council not to let the opportunity slip away to more significantly improve pedestrian and cycling safety and connectivity on Southwest Broadway Drive, and potentially allow for neighborhood access to nearby natural area, in particular for a demographic that is not generally well served in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you.
What was the name of the park? I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Which park was it?
Markham Nature Park.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
The next three are Don Bach, Chris Kopka, and Craig Kuhn.
Welcome.
Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, howdy, good to be here. I'm from Hillsdale, and my name is Don Bach. I'm coming from this in a little perspective of I spent the whole morning out there walking up and down this street. And basically, it's a terribly dangerous street to walk, but there's only segments that are most dangerous. And so I'm really proposing, and I'm going to start off with what I think should be done is, and I got to put my glasses on, I'm afraid. The redesign of street is not something that a city council ought to be doing in a meeting like this. Due to a number of concerns and problems that existed on this arterial for many years, and I've been party to several discussions about we need sidewalks in there in the past, I recommend that we refer this street portion of the proposal to PBOT, the developer, and inform community members to seek a solution that will result in a safer, more usable street and require an answer within 30 days. So I'm asking you to set it aside 30 days, give them some time to work this through, because I think there's some not great solutions, but there's some solutions that are affordable and could be done if we got some good thinking on it, and it would be going beyond the scope of this frontage, and it means taking some of the money that's set into the swim project. This is a tier 2 project in swim. It's budgeted for $500,000 to $1 million. and get a plan that says we're going to do this in 2-3 years and get a continuous thing from the end of the property that's being proposed in front of you all the way downtown. And that means doing things like, I think my hair, that means doing things like narrowing the travel lanes. Right now, we got 11-foot travel lanes. Make them 9 feet. That's going to make the cars slow down, particularly if we put some wands along the side. You know, the speed of the traffic is what's killing people, as well as the crossings. Now, if we don't have it put on the east, on the directions there's on the south side of the street, that means crossing the street at least twice. It means we need a signal, particularly at Hoffman, because, you know, as we've heard earlier, there's accidents happening there all the time. It's a terrible street to come onto Broadway Drive. You can't see to the left, and there's a blinking yellow light that doesn't slow anyone down. We need a full signal, or we need basically a pedestrian-operated signal, but that isn't going to help the cars. So a full signal is really needed at Hoffman. And we need probably another warning signal like a hawk or a rapid flashing beacon at the other crossing. Those two crossings are important if you're going to use that other side of the street. You can't expect people to cross the street without protection in this environment where we've got 4,000 cars, 4,000 to 5,000 cars a day and a speed of 33 miles an hour or something like that, particularly on a downhill. So that's my recommendation. There's some other stuff in my testimony, but the essence of it is get it back to PBOT, but make sure that they understand they got to work with the community, work with the developer, and come up with a plan in 30 days where you ask the developer to give him the full, give him the full treatment, whatever it is, sidewalk, bike lanes, and everything. That's impossible, I think, in their view, but it's still it's important that we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Christopher Kopka, resident of the neighborhood. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I think the conversation you began with Kurt Kruger presents you with an interesting dilemma, but I want to talk about what I think the council's major priority is. So the council has an absolute obligation to protect the safety of its citizens. And I don't think and with all the qualifications and conditions that the traffic engineer people have talked about, we don't have a safe solution. And so I'm pretty disturbed that we're actually having to have this conversation about what do we do to protect the safety of our citizens when we're trying to get them to walk. That's the city's objective in the city. This proposal does not result in a safe proposal that any reasonable families should use or allow their children or spouse to walk. And so I'm curious about why we're having this conversation about you considering drastically reducing the adopted city standards for on-site improvements. This sidewalk, if it's put on the north side of the street adjoining the property, it is an on-site improvement. There doesn't need to be a nexus. It's about the property in question. So I hope you'll take that into consideration. I want to talk about I want to just restate some of the conditions we're facing, and I hope you understand, because Broadway Drive is a steep slope street. I think it averages more than 6%, if I understand correctly. I think you've heard the applicant speak to the past about, well, maybe they can use Hoffman as an alternative. Hoffman has portions of it that are 23% grade. It's just not a practical solution. The proposed walkway is unusually narrow. It's sometimes 3 feet wide. It's going to be on one side of the street, so that means pedestrians coming from opposite directions have to pass each other in 3 feet. There is no protection. There's no barrier. There's no curb. There's no anything that stops a car from veering onto the pedestrian pathway. I actually have to take a little bit of exception about narrowing the lanes because this is more than cars. This is a major truck route up to the hills for people doing landscaping, for getting deliveries. So we have to accommodate trucks. It's a very windy road. And so you need the width we have, I think, to get trucks up there. If it were just cars, I might agree with you. But I think for handling trucks as well, you can't make the road narrower and make it any safer. The proposal puts the pedestrian on the downhill side of the traffic lane. It's a higher speed. It's been documented by the city. So why are we setting ourselves up for failure? And again, just please think about this in terms of your own life and your own family and having to make a decision about what we present in front of them and what their daily patterns would be. This doesn't meet that test that the city should be using.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Carla, who are the next three?
We've got
There was no
one
room
more.
for me, I got it. There was no extra chair for my
We've
third
Ed,
person.
actually, Ed Stojakovic could come up, probably.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Craig Kuhn. I'm both a Swirl board member and an immediate neighbor on Davenport to this project. At the early assistance hearing for this project in February of 2017, the applicant offered to improve the frontage of Southwest Broadway Drive, cost not to exceed $5,000. It was noted at the time that frontage improvements are not a gift, but required under code. In documents submitted in May of 19 to the hearing officer, they stated in order to fulfill a current PBOT obligation, and that in this case the 6-foot wide asphalt shoulder, they would need to construct a monolithic 742-foot wall, 12 feet high or more, 12 feet thick or more, at a cost of $695,000 estimated dollars. They declare this impractical and unproportional. I would like to present evidence showing that this massive wall is not necessary, alternatives to the scenario exist and are practical, and that they enable the developer to construct this positive benefit from the development and the larger community. A continuous wall, first off, is not necessary. I took a contractor measuring wheel from the west point of their property end. Every 10 feet along Broadway Drive, I made a mark at the fog line. At that mark, I measured with a tape measure straight to the cliff face wall. As you can see, that red line is the 6-foot mark. A good half of that frontage is further than 6 feet away from the fog line. They do not need a continuous wall. They need at best 350 odd feet of wall to cut back some 350 odd feet of rock. By their estimate, which was $936 a linear foot, that would make the wall $327,000. Clearly a savings. Not only that, they may not need a wall. PBOT and ODOT throughout this area use other methods of protecting traffic. They use wire mesh, cable netting, debris fences, shotcrete, or any other methods short of a concrete wall, which is more savings. These are often half the cost of the $47 per square foot they mention as the cost of their wall. There is an environmental zone to be created and a 50-foot wide buffer. The green vertical lines indicate the areas to the left and the second from right are places where, yes, there does need a wall to be cut. As you can see, the deepest area is where the environmental zone is. It does not need a wall at all. It doesn't need to be approached. The 6-foot wide shoulder would run through what is the proposed buffer zone because that ends at the fog line. Again, it's 6 feet further to the cliff wall. Not only that, the environmental feature is 12 to 15 feet above the road surface, and it's 15 feet further. So you have at least 30 feet in elevation and distance between the proposed shoulder and the environmental feature. There's no need to disturb it at all, and clearly the road does not.
What's a fog line, please?
The fog line is the white line to the right side of the road that indicates you're about to drive off the road in the fog. If I could say real quick, I walk this street almost every week. It's how I got here today. If I walk the preferred alternative of Hoffman that the developer proposes, I am in the roadway 80% of my trip. If they do this improvement, I am out of the roadway 80% of my trip. Please make this area safer for me and my dog and all the other residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. I'm Ed Stojakovic, and I live near the intersection of Southwest Davenport and Broadway. So Davenport is about another half-mile up the hill from where this frontage is. And I've chosen this place about 3 years ago, and it really for two reasons, one of which is obviously it's a peaceful neighborhood. The other of which is I'm car-free, so I'm proud to say I don't have a car. And this was a good alternative between getting up to the hills and getting to work. My office is near here, so I walk every day to work. We won't talk about bus service, but it gets me to Council Crest as well. But one of the things I'm concerned with by living at that intersection of Davenport and Broadway is I believe this is the access method trucks are intended to use to get to this construction site. And on those two, on the intersection from both directions, there are no truck turn signs. So what I'm seeing there on a regular basis is trucks ignoring that sign and turning onto Davenport from Broadway and getting stuck. So I see on a continual basis a truck is getting stuck there. I don't know how a construction equipment would get up that hill and turn there. There's no sign from Davenport to Broadway to turn for trucks. I think it was just assumed that trucks would never go there. In fact, my moving truck got stuck there. There's one of the things that they did, even though I told them to not go. But my garbage truck has to back down from 16th to get to my place because they cannot come up there from Broadway. And in my time there, I've not once seen police or fire be able to use that intersection. So they're continually having to come from alternative ways to get there. And I don't think this road was created for truck traffic, and I suspect it'll be a year, perhaps more, for trucks to continue to use this road. When the delivery truck comes down my road, my house is shaking, so I can't imagine dealing with this for a year, perhaps 3 years. And my parking garage, or my garage door, has dents in it from trucks turning because they can't make that turn, so they U-turn into my house to get out. But secondly, as I mentioned, I'm a pedestrian, and I do that because I don't own a car, which means I rely on walking and taking a bus. But without getting into the poor bus service, I do a lot of walking, and to walk there, I often have to cross paths. I once tried to walk Broadway. I gave up because I'm continually having to switch sides of the road, and clearly that's not a safe place to switch roads, and cars obviously speeding up and down the hill. So I believe this is a bad decision to allow that area to be built without taking advantage of an area that I think would be great to have access to me to be able to walk down that road as well as other people and be able to access Council Crest and other places. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's a very provocative photo.
That wasn't my moving truck, but that was a similar experience. And of course, when that happens, Broadway is closed, as is Davenport, for half hour.
You gotta feel sorry for the guy.
I do, but I hear it every day. I hear it from my house. It's just kind of, it's a typical thing, so.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Next three, please, Carla.
Sorry. The next three are Laura Torgerson, Sally Sarah Bachman, and Eric Stecker.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Laura Torgerson, and I've lived on Tangent Street with my family for 16 years and in the Southwest Hills for 23 years. I'm a former New York State volunteer firefighter and an EMT3, a current doctor, and a member of Portland's emergency medical response organization, Serve Oregon. This proposed planned development at the end of Tangent Street, which is a long, narrow, dead-end street, will place a large number of closely spaced structures in a heavily landscaped environment on a steep wooded slope in a wildfire hazard zone. When I moved into the area, none of us were thinking wildfires. However, in the last 10 years, we have seen a dramatic increase in devastating fires, as pointed out in recently in local and national news outlets. I am fully aware that response time means everything. It means saving a life, saving a structure, and potentially saving an entire neighborhood. The two biggest factors in successful fire suppression are response time and water pressure. I must remind the council that there was a fatal fire on Hoffman Street because the fire truck could not access the site. And to this day, that empty lot remains a grim reminder to us all. As was stated in the 2010 Fire Department City Audit, and two of our commissioners may be familiar with this report, emergency response times are not met in our area. In the report, it is clearly stated that after 5 minutes of fire inside of a home, flashover point is frequently reached. Because we live in a wooded area, fire will travel quickly, especially in drier seasons, and drier times due to climate change are upon us. Also, as stated in the report, every minute of delay for response to a cardiovascular emergency results in a 7 to 10% decrease in survivability. A 5-minute delay of ambulance results in a 35 to 50% decrease in survivability. According to the AMA, brain death results in 4 to 6 minutes. Without the delays from construction traffic, we already experience significant delays on our narrow streets. And when firefighters arrive in this planned development, they will find that the applicant's hydrant has insufficient flow to fight a wildfire. Under Fire Code Appendix B 105.2, 1 and 2 family dwellings, even with sprinklered buildings and fire-resistant construction, should have a minimum flow of 875 gallons per minute. However, the applicant's required hydrant will only have 600. While sprinklered buildings and fire-resistant construction allow the building's occupants to escape safety, they will do little to suppress fires originating outside of the home or in the surrounding area, a deck, equipment sparks in a yard, or smoldering bark mulch. While the proposed expression of code may provide adequate safety for the residents of the development, it does nothing to protect the surrounding community and rather endangers it. During construction hours, we ask that the applicant be required to station fire and medical units in positions likely to diminish delays, and we also ask that the council ensures our safety by enforcing the minimum hydrant flow in the wildfire hydrant zone.
Thank you.
My name is Sarah Bachman. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for the opportunity to address you. I'm the team leader for the Neighborhood Emergency Team for the Southwest Hills Residential League. I'm not speaking in that capacity exactly. I'm speaking in my personal capacity, but you should know what my background is to my comments. The NET is a group of volunteers who've been trained to be citizen responders to supplement the first responders, such as firefighters, in case of emergencies. Examples of a possible emergency where citizen responders are called out are a great earthquake, urban wildland fire. Short of such huge events, we are called out frequently to be, for more ordinary wind, rain, and ice storms, for example, to guard people from driving over downed electrical wires. So we are deployed all the time. Speaking as a volunteer citizen responder, in my view, the safety issues in this neighborhood are already severe. And the proposed plan, if no mitigation is required, will compound the safety problems of the neighborhood. I have 3 points. First, the roads in that neighborhood, and I'm talking about not just Broadway Drive, but also Davenport, Hoffman, and the other the other roads that Tangent Village would be accessed by, are steep and winding. They cause existing safety risks, especially in bad weather. Those risks should be mitigated in 2 ways during construction. Adequate traffic control must be strictly monitored by the city. And after construction is complete, sufficient water flow will be needed in the fire hydrant for fighting fires, as Dr. Torgerson has mentioned. Second, again, speaking to the narrow and steep roads, should Davenport be blocked due to construction traffic or an accident involving construction vehicles, the lower approach road, Hoffman, as you've heard, is really an unacceptable access road. Third, following on from my previous points, the council cannot do much in the short term to fix the road issues, obviously, but it can address the problems that inadequate water flow will cause in the event of a wildfire. The council can and should require the developer to provide adequate flow under the fire code, as mentioned by Dr. Torgerson. Finally, in my view, the proposed plan will compound the safety problems of the neighborhood, which already are severe. So thank you for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you. Commissioner Udaley?
I have a clarifying question. Does the hydrant flow fall within the scope of this appeal? Because thus far, we had been just focused on the frontage
New information
improvements.
is, I guess, being accepted for this, right?
It's a de novo hearing, so new evidence can be placed into the record.
Okay.
And issues can be raised, new issues can be raised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I did. I just wanted to just put a couple of things on the record. As the fire commissioner, I am also very concerned about response time to 911 calls, but I also want to put it in context. We have a significant increase in 911 calls that have absolutely nothing to do with fire or crime or anything like that. We have a lot of calls to 911 that are all about people that people would rather not see, our houseless population. I can tell you that I don't know how those fire engines make it to many corners of the city of Portland, but they do. They're professional, they're well-trained, and they do an excellent job. What I know about water flow is that when there's a fire, we are able to tap in the water flow from other locations so that we can have more water at a higher pressure to wherever the fire is. Today, fire, 80% of the calls that they respond to have absolutely nothing to do with fire. They are a medical first responder system. And I can tell you, I've been to the firehouses up in the Southwest Hill. and you've got some of the best public employees working in the Southwest Hills, because it scared me when I was up there and realized, oh my gosh, all these trees, if something catches on fire, all heck breaks loose, right? So so as a fire commissioner, I want you to know, I pay close attention. I'm always monitoring what's happening all over the city as it relates to fire. But I cannot say fire response is a good reason for me to either approve or disapprove, right? Because what I know is actually what the data tells me about what firefighters respond to and all the calls that they get. So I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate you. I think both of you are volunteer firefighters.
I was in the past,
You were?
yes.
I'm just a volunteer responder.
I love you both because we're absolutely need first responders, volunteers, community net are, in my opinion, some of the most unsung heroes and sheroes in our community, because you're volunteering to go into places where bad things are happening to help people be resilient, right? So thank you very much for what you do, and thank you. And by the way, you know, we're looking for more firefighters, so if you want to do that again, right? Look me up.
Thank you
both.
very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you both.
Hi, I'm Eric Stecker. I live on Davenport, abutting and just uphill from this project. I want to thank you for your time today. Appreciate you taking this issue seriously. I have written testimony with some pictures that the council clerk has. I want to talk mostly about pedestrian safety on Davenport, which we've not talked about. I also, though, in the light of this conversation, want to just mention about fire. I live right uphill from this. I obviously don't know nearly as much as you do about this, but this site has tons of vegetation, everything from little shrubs to old growth trees almost. I'm right up from that, and it is terrifying for me to think that this area where you can't get personnel and you can't get trucks. I mean, I've seen the big trucks respond to emergencies. It is not easy on this street, all the way down winding Davenport. To think that we wouldn't have the coded or the statutory flow rates on the hydrants is alarming to me. It's alarming to me. But again, I defer to experts, but I'd ask you to really take that seriously. Maybe visit the site, or we could provide more pictures of what the site looks like. It's a lot of vegetation, and my family is directly uphill from it. Moving on to the pedestrian safety. I grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and you know, as a kid, I could walk to the school bus stop when I was in first grade by myself, because we have sidewalks everywhere. And Portland is a wonderful city, and we're doing wonderful things for the environment, but we don't do well with sidewalks at all, and it's really unfortunate. I'm not a NIMBY. I understand, I read The Economist. I understand that NIMBYism and unnecessary regulation threatens our cities, and that our cities are key parts of our country, and that our cities are environmentally efficient, actually, even with regulations that may not immediately seem so because of density. So that's important. But pedestrian safety is also very important, and this would really hurt pedestrian safety on Davenport. My kids walk to school now. I wouldn't let them walk alone even to a friend's house up the street because there are no sidewalks where we are. There are curves, there are hills. Now they're finally able to walk to the bus stop. Other kids walk to the bus stop into Ainsworth, of course. And at 9 and 13, they can finally do it. They have to walk on neighbors' lawns. They hit hedges. I have some pictures. They hit hedges. Then they have to walk out from between parked cars to walk down the middle of the street in sections before they can get to the sidewalk. And I can't imagine doing that with the construction traffic, certainly. And even the number of car trips did not seem like as many as it would be. They'll all be concentrated when my kids are going to school, at least. And it's really, really alarming, and it would really diminish the quality of our experience as a family. And you know, all the property taxes we pay and everything. I'm not even asking for sidewalks. I'm just asking for a plan. You know, there's no connection. You know, they're not, the developer's not building a street. They're building I don't know what the definitions are, but they're building a driveway on their own property to the houses, you know. There is no street connection to Broadway. It all comes up Davenport, which if you take a look at a map, it's not great. Please also keep in mind, Hoffman is unusable by trucks, and I used Hoffman once in 13 years. I'll never do it again. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next three, please.
Are Peter Boycourt, Geraldine Raw, and Joan Sterrett. Or Sloan? Sterrett, okay.
Mayor, while we're waiting for our next guest, just a little housekeeping matter. There are 2 Bureau of Environmental Service ordinances that are on the afternoon agenda. I'm pulling them and setting them over for next week, so before you leave, we'll have Carla read them, and they'll be set over. And I'm also got a 4:30 absence, so it might affect the ability to vote on emergency ordinances. So if my colleagues could take a look to see whether there are any emergency ordinances that have to be passed today, or can the emergency can be removed and just set over for a second reading?
Carla, how are we doing on public testimony?
We have 3 more after them, and then we have 8 on the opposed appeal.
Okay, so there is a chance that we will get through the land use hearing. I see no chance that we will get through any of the rest of the agenda before we lose the quorum.
For the emergency.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Mayor, is it possible for us to suspend the meeting with the agreement of folks here, do what's on emergency, which will only take maybe 10 minutes, and then go back and start taking more testimony?
Yeah, why don't we do this? Why don't we go for another 45 or 50 minutes? Let's see how we're doing. And then prior to Commissioner Fish doesn't need to be here for the emergency ordinances. I've got another, I think that says.
3:35?
And I've got till
Another hour.
4:45, so I've got an hour and 15 minutes. So I think we're okay with the emergency ordinances.
All right.
All right, good. All right. Good afternoon.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Mr.
Thank you
Mayor,
for being here.
I'm Geraldine Rao, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for coming. I will read notes because I know you have a time frame here. On 20 March 2018, I was at about 9:30 in the morning. I was in the kitchen, all dressed, waiting for my husband to come out. When he came out, I recognized immediately he had had a stroke. And you talk about your firemen, they were perfect. I called 911, they were there in minutes, and followed by another truck who came in with paramedics and all kinds of equipment. They were on the phone to the stroke section at OHSU, and by the time your firemen got them up, it was within 1 hour, which is critical when you have this type stroke, to operate on my husband. Not only did early medical attention save his life, the success of the recovery has given his life dignity and some independence. I'm forever thankful. Now, I'm also going to mention when I heard you say we have no sidewalks, which is true. So our little children walk to school with no sidewalks on the street. The people who buy, no property, it's a disaster. And then when you mention using Hoffman as an entrance, I've gone down there when I've had to back up. And this past Tuesday, I had an appointment at OHSU at 8:25, leaving my house at 7:45. I can see OHSU. I was able to make the time, but I got down Hoffman, and there's a flashing red, which meant I can come, but out of nowhere, coming up Broadway, even though the yellow light wasn't blinking, this car comes right in. It was only through a lot of skill that wasn't an accident there. I was able to skirt my car around to get out of his way. He was jumping a light. There was no yellow light. He shouldn't have been there, and because of red flashing light. That is a situation that cannot continue. And if, fortunately, everything turned out for my husband, but to think that you can use Hoffman as an alternative to get to where you're going, it's not true.
Mayor, may I?
Commissioner Hardesty.
I just want to thank you, my firefighters. You may know we have women on the fire force nowadays, so it's not just men. They would be thrilled to know that your
Please
husband.
pass them on, that we love them forever.
I certainly will.
They saved my husband's life.
I will pass that along to them, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate you saying that on the public record.
With sincerity.
I also want you to know that your neighborhood isn't the only neighborhood without sidewalks in the city of Portland, right? I live in East Portland, and I got to tell you, I followed some gentlemen through your neighborhood on a walking tour through the trails. I couldn't keep up with them, right? They've been doing it forever, right? But I know exactly what you're talking about.
That walkers love to go out there. You see bicycles going up that street.
Well,
It's a
I had
walking street.
I don't know how they do it, because I live in East Portland, and I would not get on a bike yet. I don't care how many bike lanes they put in East Portland, I'm not getting on a bike in East Portland, because I don't feel safe on a bike in a neighborhood with
All right,
almost no
back
streets.
to the hearing.
Yeah.
Back to the hearing.
But I just want you to know I hear you, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Hello, Mayor. Hello, Commissioners. Excuse me. My name is Peter Boycourt. Me and my family have lived on Tangent Street since 1968. We've known the Ginthers, and my mother and Marva Ginther were friends. If this helps at all, I went to high school with Sarah Boone. So you're in great hands there. Yes. Since his project's proposal, the developer and the city have worked together to move forward with the 20 units. During this time, there have been many adjustments to the building codes to allow it to move forward. While many are reasonable and to be expected, others have been inadequate to the neighborhood community, especially with concerns to public safety. We've gone over several of these. The applicant has received adjustments on areas like open space, firefighting, and pedestrian impacts. And one of the things to think about is that what we're working on is an adjustment to an adjustment. You know, it's been one thing for us to want to make sure that we have that safe space. For me, the tipping point is when this adjustment was only to help the developer, but to endanger public safety or the surrounding community, specifically on the routes into the development. This is especially important for most vulnerable PSU students who often use Broadway Drive to get to school, and those using Davenport to get to Ainsworth and Lincoln. The developer has a history of constructing and maintaining beautiful properties. It's true. For example, Wilcox. He has demonstrated the ability to make safe communities in the past. He continues his commitment by following the rule of the code and enhancing the community. While it supports dense population and affordable housing, this jeopardizes public safety, setting a dangerous precedent not only for this project, but for future projects as well. And we're asking you to please have them follow through on the mitigation factors that were brought up by Swirl.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Carla, sorry.
Hello, sorry. The next three are Ryan Feder and John, I can't understand the last name, starts with a K. Thank you. And then the last person who signed up is Mark Vanderveer.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mayor, Commissioners, Ryan Feedy, resident of Southwest Hawthorne Terrace, just off of Davenport and Broadway. Here representing more than me, my 3 young kids at home to make Portland a more walkable, bikeable place. And in lieu of the time constraints, I'll try to keep this short to something new and additive. I'm in support of those who have gone before me. But just want to say that in addition to the city code policy, we also have the city comprehensive plan. I believe it's policy 9.6, which I've heard referred to as the street hierarchy. That, number 1 priority is for walkers, second priority for bicyclists, on down the line, right? And making sure we're holding to our policies. I think if you've ever walked Southwest Broadway, if you haven't, I'd encourage you to get out there at some point, take your kids, take your spouses, take your best friend, walk up and down it. I think it's easy to realize that not only is it not safe, but what it could be is one of our most beautiful promenades from downtown, Portland State, the end of the Transit Mall, up to Council Crest and Markham Park. In a few weeks from now, we'll dedicate a bridge going across Burnside to a fellow Swirl resident, a neighbor, former neighbor on Southwest Hawthorne Terrace, Barbara Walker, who championed for years making Portland more walkable for Markham Park and our parks. And I think she would want nothing more, given the few times I got to meet her, which was a pleasure, to make sure that all of you are showing leadership in ensuring that we can make Portland a more walkable, bikeable place, more than naming a bridge after her. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Mayor, Council, my name is John Kozadar. I'm a ghost who lives on Tangent Street, right where the private street will descend into the development. And I've lived there for 29 years. The city council has a vision of a pedestrian and bicycle-friendly city, and so do I. I want to zero in on the transportation impacts. The hearings officer makes a mistake when he lumps Broadway Drive, Tangent, and Davenport Streets and proclaims them as a package of being, they can be traveled safely on foot and on bicycle, I'm quoting him, even without sidewalks. The appeal is so well thought out and so well written, it says everything. There's not much I can add to it in 3 minutes, except for a personal element. Now, a previous city traffic engineer said that this proposed development will only add 60 cars a day to Broadway Drive. Before the hearings officer, another PBOT engineer said that this development will add 148 cars a day to Davenport and Tangent. So which is it? It's the higher one, it really is. You can do this on your kitchen table. You take 20 residences and multiply the multiple trips by car in and out of there. There's the number. If the code is this flexible, according to the hearings officer, why even have a code? Anticipatory reality, he calls it. I call it something else. The code is clear enough without manipulation and semantic gymnastics. And most importantly, how does this decision, his decision, mesh with our goal of a connected, pedestrian, and bicycle-friendly city? I'd like to add one more point to this, is that this development doesn't even have sidewalks itself. It has virtual sidewalks. It has a different color along the edges of the street down there, and that's deemed to be a sidewalk. I was raised in Northeast Portland at Northeast 36th and Ainsworth, and I went to kindergarten at Kennedy School. And my mother, as a 5-year-old, sent me to kindergarten without fear because there were sidewalks there, curbs there, and the streets offered good visibility. If we could offer that 65 years ago, why can't we do it now? Thanks for paying attention.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi. My name is Mark Vanderveer. I'm a resident of the Southwest Hills neighborhood. I've driven Broadway Drive for the last 32 years or so. I know that it's very dangerous, and I think you've heard a lot of testimony here that confirms that. And the proposal that we're looking at here will not make the street any more safe. And I think that does conflict with both the PED PDX plan that you folks have adopted just this year and also Vision Zero to try to eliminate vehicle pedestrian interactions. So I don't need to say anything more about that, but I would like to make a comment on the hearing officer's supposed authority on constitutionality of the proposed mitigations here. He's not a constitutional lawyer. People in BDS aren't constitutional lawyers. You can't really be swayed by what might happen if you take the right action here. You can't let potential obstacles stand in the way of doing the right thing. If this matter is going to be litigated, it'll be litigated. And so you just need to, I think, take a breath here and do what's right for the city and for its citizens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all who signed up on that.
Very good. All right, next up is the principal opponent. Because the appellant got an extra minute, if the principal opponent would like to take 16 minutes as opposed to 15, you're certainly welcome to do so. So Carla, if you could set it for 16.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. My name is Chris Koback, and I represent the applicant Gunther LLC. Gunther LLC is Ken Gunther, his daughter Lisa Phillips.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Ken Gunther, his daughter Lisa Phillips, and her husband Ralph Phillips, who are here and will speak.
Thank you.
With me are a couple of other opponents of the appeal. They have a lot to. Yeah, they have 6 to 8 inches. I have a couple of gentlemen here that worked on this with staff, and I'm hoping they get their own 3 minutes, even though they are consultants. They have a lot to say, and there's a lot to respond to. If they don't get their own 3 minutes, we'll work to squeeze it in.
I don't think they do. I think they're just.
They're part of me.
Part of you.
But they
Okay.
can sign up for 3 minutes.
They signed up, but.
Then they get 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Cairns and staff, I think, both pointed out something that's really important. This is a complicated project, and it went through a complicated process. It didn't involve just Gunther LLC. They had probably 10 consultants, structural engineers, civil engineers, environmental consultants. It involved numerous staff experts, environmental experts, BES, PBOT, and that collaborative effort went on for about 2 years. And before we got to the hearings officer, together we estimated about 4,000 hours. Since then, there's been another approximately 1,000 hours dealing with the current design of the improvements on the south side. Those hours and that collaboration produced a staff report that went to the hearings officer, and the staff report had a unanimous recommendation of approval. And that's important because it demonstrates exactly how the process should work. It was back and forth. It was dealing with complicated issues. I'm not going to talk about a lot of the issues. I don't think they are part of the appeal, and I just need to state that for the record. The appeal was limited to one issue. And I know it's de novo, and we understand new evidence can come in on that issue. But by allowing new evidence on issues that weren't appealed, it's essentially allowing another appeal long after the appeal period has expired. And that is a little prejudicial to the applicant because we were prepared for the appeal that was submitted.
Could we take a break here and get an opinion from legal counsel on that?
Portland zoning code, nor the notice, nor Oregon law limits an appeal, a local appeal, to only those issues that were noticed. That's not how our code functions, and that's not how we've ever interpreted our code. So new issues could be raised today.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to still talk about the main issue, and that is the transportation. I want to talk about how it got there. So as the project was proposed, there would be virtually no impacts on this segment of Broadway because the development is all on a parcel of property above Broadway, and it's confined to this 1.3 acres. And there is no access to Broadway. It's impossible physically and with site distance issues to put a road in. So all of the traffic, pedestrian, bike, vehicular traffic, everything was to go different directions than Broadway. And it would take either a wrong turn or somebody doing something out of the ordinary to use this segment of Broadway. They would, if they were going downtown, they would tend to go to Hoffman. If they were going west, you heard testimony from your PBOT expert that they would go out Davenport. Same thing for bikes and pedestrians. There was no way to get to this segment. Now that changed because of a connectivity issue. And this is the fact that there's 3,000 feet between Davenport and Hoffman. And the code, I believe, requires block length to be 500 or 600 feet. The applicant had absolutely nothing to do with creating that situation. It is really how that area developed. And there was one right-of-way, Prince, that was there. Could have been extended, but the city built a water facility on it, so that was no longer an option. So in the course of this dialogue, the staff came to the applicant and said, we need connectivity. We have a code that requires connectivity. Under the Hill case, I don't believe that was...
Excuse me, the clock's not running.
Oh, I guess I... Thank you.
Okay. That's not your fault. Keep going.
Under the Hill case, I don't think the applicant was required to put that connection in because, again, our impacts did not create that block length issue. But as to evidence this ongoing cooperation and attempt to do something that was right, my client agreed to put in a connection, and it was agreed it would be a pedestrian connection because a road just wasn't feasible. Now, that one element, that pedestrian connection, is the only feature that could potentially create any real impacts because it allowed some pedestrians to get to Broadway that wouldn't have been able to get there before. So that raised the issue of what improvements are we going to put on Broadway? Now, the evidence in the record, and the hearings officer agreed with this, is that the professional traffic people opined that even with that pedestrian pathway, the pedestrian traffic coming down to Broadway would be minimal. I think the term was negligible. And on page 28 of his decision, the hearings officer agreed that he had to conclude that it would be negligible. And so with negligible impacts and PBOT already finding that otherwise the system is capable of supporting the development, the question is what kind of improvements could we impose on private development? And this brings up this constitutional issue. In Hill, and the reason I cited it is the court, and I did that case from beginning to end, and the court was very clear that if you have a requirement, that's just the beginning. You cannot just impose a requirement because you have a requirement. You still, if you're going to take something from private development, there still has to be this impact analysis. And so in the course of the working through this issue, PBOT looked at the standard improvements, and I think everybody agrees those could not be done feasibly or proportionately. Then there was another segment where they looked at the 6-foot path on the north side. And we've heard conflicting testimony. These gentlemen will tell you, one of them is an engineer. They worked with PBOT and eventually did a site visit. This wasn't done in a back room. They went out to the site and they looked with engineering at what it would cost to do just that 6-foot shoulder. And that's where the number of almost $700,000 came. So under the law, you don't compare that impact with the cost of the development or the overall benefit. You're required to compare that to the project impacts. And we have this recognized fact that the project impacts on Broadway are going to be negligible. So when you compare negligible impacts from the development with 700,000, that's where PBOT in the latest alternative review came back and said, we can't require that. That would not be proportionate. Now, we didn't get into the nexus. I agree with Mr. Kearns. The nexus issue under Hill didn't come up. It could have, because with negligible impacts, the developer could have said, we don't have to do any improvements. But continuing the dialogue with PBOT, just like we did something to help on connectivity, and that pathway didn't meet code. It's still over 1,500 feet block lengths. But everybody agreed we would do collectively what we could to make it better. And so that was the spirit on the south side. It wasn't, we didn't look at nexus. The applicant went with PBOT out to the site and said, okay, if it's not proportionate on the north side, what can we do together? And they came up with limited improvements. We disagree with that. We think they're pretty extensive improvements given the impacts. And that's what the hearings officer imposed. Those improvements changed a little bit over time because after the hearings officer's decision, the reason it was limited to gravel, by the way, was stormwater. I think you heard from your staff that one of the big problems in this area is if you do pavement, you've got to deal with stormwater. Stormwater in this site, it doesn't infiltrate, so you have to take it somewhere. It's very expensive. After the hearings officer's decision, BES came back with an idea that there could be a special circumstance that would allow the applicant to put pavement on the south side and pay a fee instead of building stormwater. And that special circumstance is what allowed the scope of the development to change and allowed pavement on the south side. Now, I think everybody can agree if there was an unlimited amount of money, there is probably the desire and the will to improve all of our streets with sidewalks, good sidewalks, bike lanes. A lot of us in this room are walkers. A lot of us are bike commuters. We come from different parts of town, and I agree with Commissioner Hardesty. I bike in from the east side. I don't go on 33rd Avenue. I wish it had bike lanes, but I don't think it's ever going to have them because the city doesn't have the money to do it, and there's no way a private developer is going to be able to fund that. So we'd all like it, but we've worked collaboratively with staff and within the confines of the law to come up with something that improves the situation and it compliant with the constitutional law, and it makes a lot of sense for a development that otherwise meets every box. Every one of your experts concurred that this was a proposal eventually that met not only the spirit of the code, but the technical language of the code. And so that's our presentation on the improvements. And we believe that, when the appellants question the hearings officer. I think what I'd like you to remember is they're really questioning and criticizing staff too, because the hearings officer's decision was largely an adoption of the recommendations from the staff that worked tirelessly with the applicant on this application and came up with this proposal. On a couple of the other issues, on Davenport, I don't think it's part of the appeal, but it's kind of the same situation. It's an existing situation. Professional traffic evidence here was that they operate safe, without sidewalks, without substantial improvements, and we run into the same problem. If this development with negligible impacts has to do sidewalks, it's not proportionate. You can't, the reality is that we're not going to have development in some places if we continue or if we impose burdens on developers to fix existing larger problems. Our client is doing more than what the opponents to the project lead you to believe. And this is an idea that could work up in that area, and it works in other parts of the city. We didn't, with negligible impacts, I don't think my client had to do anything on the north side, but they have agreed to the dedication of significant property on the north side, and they've waived the right to remonstrate. And that waiver will be recorded against all the properties. So at least in the future, if there's money available from another fund, and we know that we have the Portland in Motion project, our client has given the city and citizens something on the north side that in the future could be very useful in developing the improvements that everybody would like to see. And that would be a way to do it that would not impose what we believe is an unconstitutional burden on just one private developer. So I've got you through the legal stuff. Unless there are questions, and I have had extra time, so I'm going to cut it off a little short. I'd like the two gentleman seated with me, Mike Ard, who's a traffic engineer, who worked with PBOT to define the impacts and work through the process. And then our civil engineer, Chris Delorier, will talk about the actual engineering because he actually did the design. And the $700,000 is not a made-up number. So with that, I'll introduce Mike.
If you wouldn't mind, I think Commissioner Udaley had a question first, then we can get to this gentleman. Thank you.
And these questions don't count.
Can you stop the clock?
Yes. These questions don't count against your time. I think one thing that I hope everyone in the room can agree on is that the way that Portland has decided to require sidewalks to be built and maintained is not preferable. It's not the typical across the country for property owners to be responsible for creating and maintaining sidewalks. As the Transportation Commissioner, I wish that I could deliver sidewalks to the whole city, but with $3.2 billion in deferred maintenance, I am very sorry to say that that is not going to happen. Deferred maintenance on existing assets, that is probably not going to happen in my lifetime. I need clarity on the issue of what triggers the requirement to build the sidewalk. Is it the development itself, or is it the pedestrian path that's triggering the improvements on Broadway?
Well, the way the code is written is under Title 17, any permit, it reads anyway, 17.88.020, I think it is, says
Wow.
any development triggers standard improvements or House Street improvements.
All the way around the
Right.
property.
And then
'Cause
there's
we're
a
calling
rela-
it frontage,
It's
but
the frontage.
not
Yeah, it's,
really frontage. It's more like backage, but yeah.
well, in this case, you know, it's technically frontage on the property. We disagree that it's on site. There's no development on that part of Broadway, on that part of, this is an environmental tract. So we don't believe it's any part of the development side, but it is technically frontage of the property that's owned by us. So Title 17 and then 33654 sets up your guidelines for, they're just standards. So these are how we want our streets to look, and here's how we want our sidewalks to work and look. And those are great policies. But what our courts have said is we have to temper those requirements with the Constitution. So we can require, if we weren't asking a private developer to pay money under the Coons case or dedicate property, there wouldn't be an issue. But when you get into asking a developer, a private party, to pay money or give property, That's where this Nolan-Dolan test comes in, and you have to show that the project impacts create, one, a nexus with a policy or provision that would allow the city to deny the application. So the impacts have to be such that you could say, those impacts are so great, we can deny that application. If you can do that, then you can take the property or the money and fix the problem. But if you get by the nexus, then you still have to get to the bigger issue in this case is it still has to be roughly proportionate. And it has to be roughly proportionate with the impacts. So if you have a development that has great impacts, you can require, and you have a nexus, you can require the developer to do more. If you have a project like this where you have negligible impacts, because there's only a few pedestrians and almost no cars from the development that will go on this stretch, the improvements that you can take from somebody are very limited in our view. And I think that's what the law says.
So I want to just express a concern with the current plan, and that is we're creating a pedestrian path to a street that isn't safe for pedestrians. And we are accepting a south side solution that is also not ultimately safe for pedestrians. I understand everything you just said. I recognize the unique terrain and various challenges of building this kind of infrastructure in Southwest Portland. I'm very concerned that we'd in any way be encouraging use of that street that is actually not safe. And I don't expect you to respond to that. I just want to lay down that, unless you want to.
I would like to respond to that.
I want to lay down that concern.
I would like to respond to
Yeah.
that. So the safety issues that we've heard about today are existing issues. There's speed of traffic coming down, 4,000 cars.
Yeah.
But the point that we're trying to emphasize is that impact is not coming from this development. It's not our cars creating the problem. And so the pedestrian pathway is the one part of this development that is contributing, because as the hearings officer noted, and I think everybody here knows, that has the potential of allowing pedestrians to get there. One idea that really makes sense to me, and I don't know if council can do this or not, is defer the pathway until such time as the city can work on a program to make the pedestrian improvements practicable. The connectivity is just a general standard. And like I said, the block length has been that way for years, and the development doesn't do anything to it, doesn't contribute
Adds
to it.
another 20 houses.
Pardon?
It adds another 20 homes.
Exactly.
People who are going to need to be walking to their friends who live on Broadway Drive. And so if even one extra person is walking to Broadway Drive to get to the home of a friend, then you're putting that person in harm's way by not having, and we're not asking, the community's not asking for a standard improvement with full sidewalks. They're asking for some kind of alternative treatment on the north side.
Correct. What I suggested is if the pedestrian pathway was deferred until a time when there were better
Then
improvements.
people can't get to their friends, and that's another policy. That would be waiving two policies that we have in city code.
And my client agreed to do it. And it's not inexpensive to do it. They're doing it. They recognize that that's a policy that the city promotes, and they're doing it. They didn't resist that.
Right, so we now have to provide a
But
safe
it
place once they
it
get
is
there.
the one issue that puts pedestrians on this place. And then you get to the question of, okay, if a few pedestrians are going to go down there, how does that limited impact justify the $700,000 of improvements?
Well, I think that's something that perhaps the suggestion that you go back with Peabot and the neighbours to talk about, does it have to be a $7,000 improvement? We've got paths that go through parks that are boardwalks with anti-slip grating on them, which don't cost that amount of money.
It's the wall, I think.
Well, the cost is associated with the hillside. So to put those improvements in, there's a basalt hillside that has to be moved. And that takes a lot of time and money to move the hillside, and then you have to retain the hillside.
Did you calculate the amount of hillside to be removed as was shown on the diagram that was given of the distances?
Mr. Delore and the PBOT staff went out to the site and did do that, and he's got calculations that are engineered calculations that show exactly what work has to be done.
Sir, let me ask you two questions. The first is, I've sat through a lot of these hearings over the years, and people normally raise constitutional issues to preserve them on the record. But I don't remember the last time we had a hearing where the constitutional question loomed this large over the proceeding. And we've been told by counsel that if ultimately we get this wrong, LUBA would essentially reverse us and send it back with instructions, which I take it you agree with, at least in terms of the procedural posture. But the question I want to ask you is, it seems to me some of the arguments you're making about the limited impact of development, which would effectively get your client off the hook for building out the sidewalk, could be advanced by anybody subject to our sidewalk rule. I mean, with the exception of, almost invariably, particularly where we do these sidewalks to nowhere, just a stretch of sidewalk, it seems to me an artful lawyer, artfully crafted legal argument would make the same constitutional argument that it's disproportionate and thereby undercut, our whole code that deals with sidewalks. So would you give me some comfort that the argument you're making here isn't an invitation to effectively invalidate our code?
I do not think the argument we're making today would invalidate the code. I believe it allows the reasonable application of the code within the constitutional law. For example, on the east side, there are a lot of sidewalk improvements done because it's flat and they can be done proportionately. Other neighborhoods, and even on the west side that are flat, that have sidewalks, infill is doing them because they can be done proportionately and it works. I think this site evidences something that we don't see often, but we do see on the west side mostly, and that is the topography makes this improvement disproportionate. It's not to say that this rule, if you were to agree with us, that these improvements that PBOT agrees are proportionate on the south side. If you agree with us, I don't think you're taking away council or staff's ability to say in another case where the topography allows improvements to be made proportionately, that somebody's going to be able to say, well, look what you did on Broadway. It's apples and oranges. Now, would I be able to say there's never going to be a case where a proportionality issue comes up? No, I think it comes up a bit.
But aren't you I just want to play this out a little bit. Aren't you effectively saying that in whole swaths of the city where you have a certain kind of topography, the additional cost burden of complying with our code gives you a constitutional argument? Isn't that what we're really talking about? I mean, it's not like your clients are sophisticated actors. They went into this knowing the topography, they knew the site, they knew the code, they knew that there would be an additional cost. I assume it says in the application before us, these are going to be sold as market rate condos. Market rate condos in that neighborhood go for a premium. As long as the market doesn't tank, I assume they could add on a little extra to the premium to cover the cost. I mean, aren't we effectively, isn't this come back as sort of a disguised cost argument in areas where the topography makes, by definition, the cost greater to comply with our code, and therefore aren't we opening up a Pandora's box in that area?
Well, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of the cost, which is a result of topography and other issues.
But your clients knew, right, when they acquired the land.
But also, in my opinion, we're looking at, there's an existing problem. And everybody, even the opponents in their material, agree that the development is responsible to address its impacts. So it's a combination of evaluating the cost, which is largely a result of topography and other constraints, against the specific project impacts. And so there will be cases, no doubt, where the project impacts are few and the cost is great, and somebody's going to have to tackle with the proportionality issue.
So let me just ask one final question, if I could, Mayor, and I apologize. And I will just preview from my colleagues, because there are some legal issues here that are somewhat first impression for me, Commissioner Fritz, may have spent time, but I don't remember, and we've had a lot of hearings, and I think this one turns uniquely on some legal issues. I'm not sure, under the best of circumstances, I'll be able to reach a judgment today. I think I'm going to need a set over and an opportunity to get some additional legal information. But let me ask you a very simple question, just to make sure I'm not missing something. If the two cases that you've cited that govern in this, that you believe govern, and that in effect potentially weaken our ability to enforce our code, if those cases were not on the table, if they didn't exist, if they had never been decided, is there any question that our code would require the improvements on the north side of Broadway? I'm sorry, my phone is now responding to my voice. Siri, give me a break here. I'm in the middle of the hearing.
Did your phone give a good answer?
But I mean, let me just try to state it in plain English. If we weren't arguing about constitutional takings under the cases you've cited, is there any ambiguity in our code about whether your client is required to do the build-out that we're arguing over?
I'm going to answer that directly. There are more cases than just the two. That's two recent cases. But if you take the constitutional concept out of the equation, the code is clear that standard improvements are required, can be required as a condition of development. 17.88.020 states that the city engineer can require improvements.
Let me just say that I'd like to see you on the stage with the other Democrats debating, because you actually gave a direct answer to a question, and I appreciate that, as we're trying to divine answers from other people. So our code is clear. The constitutional question is murkier, and we've been told by counsel that if we get it wrong, the consequences, LUBA will admonish us and send it back. So that's partly what we're trying to work out here.
Right, and I appreciate this is a case where the constitutional issue is maybe looming larger, but that's largely because the hearings officer's decision and staff's decision was specific on that issue. The reason they imposed this condition on the south side was because they made the decision that the Constitution required.
Sir, you'd be committing malpractice if you didn't raise it. It is unusual in our hearings for the constitutional issue to be stated so boldly. It usually is just thrown into the hopper, so you've preserved your right. Here it is at the core of what we have to decide.
It is at the core of this case, I agree.
Thank you.
I just love lawyers when they talk to each other.
I'm no longer a lawyer. I'm a non-practicing, recovering lawyer.
I'm going to wait till it comes out on Netflix.
Lawyers talking to each other.
Very good. So you wanted to turn over to these
I want to
gentlemen.
turn over,
Very
I think
good.
Mr. Ard is going to testify first.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Mike Ard. I'm a professional transportation engineer with Ard Engineering. I've been practicing for about 20 years. I was brought into this project to focus on that Broadway frontage section of the project and to look at potential solutions as well as proportionality. I want to talk about three things: the difficulty of the project, the impacts of the project, and the solution. First, in talking about the difficulty, the city of Portland, as I was brought into the project, was asking for a widened shoulder, 6 feet wide, along the north side of Broadway. They had already given up on the full width of improvements. And I examined that and found that due to the presence of wetlands, steep slopes, and a cliff that limits both the ability to construct the improvements and the sight lines that are necessary for safety, for being able to cross the road, created major problems, and it was impractical to construct that widened shoulder. In particular, the March 13th, 2019 memorandum that I prepared talked about those issues in detail. And what I saw when I visited the site was that there was no safe place to cross at the upper or lower ends of the site that was actually within the site frontage. The city of Portland asked us to identify a safe crossing location, and I actually had to go off-site a little bit to the northeast, downhill from the subject property, to find a location where you could see far enough down the road that it was safe to make a crossing, and our proposed improvements actually included a crossing at that location. But what that means is that if we do these improvements, the 6-foot widening on the uphill side of the road, we put people into that same jeopardy that I identified, that they need to cross the road at locations where safe crossing distances are not available. So we did find that from a perspective of feasibility, safety, and practicality, and legality, there were problems associated with that 6-foot wide improvement on the uphill side of the roadway. I will note that the appellants here have talked specifically about the idea of having the improvements be on the uphill lane so that bicyclists, as they're moving uphill, have that safe refuge. But we're talking about a discontinuous improvement in the middle of Southwest Broadway Drive with no way to access that safe shoulder either before or after it. We're talking about a roadway that has very, very low volumes of uphill bicycle traffic and actually fairly high volumes of downhill bicycle traffic for precisely the reason that that infrastructure is not there. So it was never our intent to encourage people to put themselves into an unsafe position, and for that reason, we asked the city to consider alternatives. We did meet with the city as well as Swirl in pretty much exactly the fashion that the appellants were talking about meeting on the site. And we talked through the issues, we talked through possibilities, and the solution that we came to at that time, which was the best available to us, was the improvements to the south side shoulder. Since then, we got a reprieve on a stormwater issue that allowed us to make even further improvements and go to paving. But that was the best solution we could get for safety. As far as impacts of the project, we also looked in detail at what the project would do. And actually, there were two sets of numbers that were talked about today. One, 148 trips, and another one, 60 trips. Both of those numbers are correct. 148 trips is the number of trips that would be actually at the site moving on to Tangent, but from there they split into three primary directions, one going downhill on Broadway, one going uphill on Broadway, and one coming through the local street network to the north via streets like Montgomery. And with that diffusion, we don't put more than about 60 trips onto any segment of Broadway. So the impacts on Broadway are that low, but more particularly, on the site frontage, the part that we're talking about improving, we'd expect no new vehicular trips because you'd have to be coming up the hill, past Hoffman, continue on up to the north end, and then come back the long way, or vice versa, come down the hill past the site and then backtrack. Either one adds a significant distance to the travel and isn't really a reasonable route for traffic. So we don't expect that there would be a significant addition. In fact, it would be a near zero addition of motorized vehicle traffic to Broadway. In terms of the impact of the path, there will be a path connecting there. We expect that in the future, as there are improvements to Broadway, that path will become more meaningful. It's less meaningful in the current context. As far as adding even one pedestrian trip, the reality is that from this development, the safest and most direct paths out of the neighborhood aren't on Broadway. So we don't expect that there's going to be a lot of trips that are using that from this development or from existing development in the site vicinity. But there is one other piece of it that I wanted to briefly touch on, which is that there's been some discussion of people that are walking on Broadway currently. And if you are living further up the hill on Broadway, walking down Broadway currently, there's no great exit point at which you can move on to the local streets in a safer network. And this path actually would allow people that are walking that upper segment of Broadway to connect onto the path, get off of Broadway, and then move through the local street system to get further down the roadway. So there is a potential safety benefit associated with that path, and it's unclear whether there would be a net increase or decrease in walking on Broadway associated with this as a result. So we've worked extensively with staff and with Swirl to try to come to the best possible solution. We heard testimony that the gravel has been problematic, and we have moved to paving there. So we believe that it is a substantial improvement to safety in the area. We believe that what's been proposed is proportional to the impacts of this project as well. For that reason, we'd ask you to affirm the hearings officer's decision with our new improvement plan.
Commissioner Fritz.
So now that you've been allowed to pave the south side, why can't you just move the road? Move the striping on the road so that the improvements, so that the north side has the existing paving is used with a 6-foot.
We did consider that as a possibility, and we discussed that with PBOT staff. It still leaves us in that same position where we have unsafe crossings at the north side and south side of the roadway. And we're really not trying to create a network in which there are unsafe crossings.
But according to the map that was entered into the record, the north side has pretty much complete a safe way to get all the way from here to the other side of your property on.
Having walked that, I would strongly disagree with the assertion that there is a continuous path on the north side absent this site frontage. There are multiple locations along the roadway on both sides, actually, that are problematic for navigation, which is why the pedestrian and bicycle volumes are so low under existing conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty? No. Commissioner Udaley, did you have a question?
I'm sorry. Right as you were answering the question about moving the lanes, staff brought me a note and I got distracted.
Oh.
It sounds like too simple and good to be true, but I want to hear why you feel that's not an option.
Yeah, we discussed that with PBOT staff, and you're welcome to confer with them on this as well, but we talked about the possibility of shifting the lane lines, and that was not considered to be an optimal solution. The primary reason is that we would like to have the facilities be as continuous as possible. And right now, we have the advantage that in the downhill direction, there's a usable shoulder on the south side of the roadway. The north side actually has a significant amount of parking associated with it right now that's obstructing that. There was some talk about possibly being able to shift that, but we still create this situation if we have the north side be our shoulder, that we get to the north end of the property and we run into issues with needing to cross again.
And that was one of my concerns, that if this 6-foot shoulder was created, that it would turn into parking.
Yeah,
and disrupt.
there is certainly that possibility. The other thing that came up, and I mentioned this in my March 13th letter, is that you need sight lines going around the corner on the inside. So as you get toward the eastern end of the property, there's a section that's a very vertical wall face, and it's right next to where the Portland Water Bureau's access is, their driveway. And as we make those shoulder improvements there and widen out that road, we couldn't see far enough around that corner to have a safe crossing there. And again, that's why we had to locate a crossing east of our property frontage, and we actually ended up putting it in the frontage of the Portland Water Bureau in order to identify that safe crossing location.
That's the spot you identified?
Yeah, and the trail egress point is all the way at the eastern end of our property. We actually tried to move that trail so that it would go through the Water Bureau property, but they did not accept our request to locate a path on their property. So all we could do is bring it in as close as possible and then provide a treatment that guides people toward the safe crossing location.
And what's the intersection for that safe crossing?
It's not at an intersection. It
It's
isn't. Yeah, the
just
closest
east.
intersection
Okay.
there would be the access point to some apartments that's much farther to the east, and the full street would be the Hoffman intersection that's way downhill. I did also submit into the record, just so you're aware, crash history associated with Hoffman that shows the most recent 10 years of data that was available for that intersection, and found a low crash rate, low severity, and a low number of overall crashes. So there wasn't anything that stood out as particularly problematic as compared to other intersections in the city of Portland there.
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Mr. Delorier. My name is Chris Delorier. I am the civil engineer of record on the project. I work for WDY Engineers, Inc.
No, are we going to take this as the 3 minutes that you signed up for?
Sure.
Why don't we do that? Because you only have 9 seconds left as part of the presentation.
Yeah, I thought we were doing
So-
that for mine too.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
The director of civil engineering at WDY and a principal. So I'm just going to read through mine. If you got any questions when we're done, if I have any time left, I might make some more comments here. So the north side of Broadway follows a steep cut bank, 2:1 to 1.5:1 in steepness. It's pretty steep. And most of the cut slopes along the north side of Broadway are near vertical or are actually exposed rock walls. Early in the development process, the applicant submitted their alternative design review appeals to request a more appropriate design, different than the standard improvements, or to be relieved from the improvements altogether, as there was no economical feasible way to construct the full standard half-street improvements as originally requested in the 2017 early assistance. PBOT concurred that it was not feasible to construct standard improvements reduce the request to a 6-foot wide paved asphalt shoulder on the north side of Broadway. This concept does require significant excavation of the hillside and basalt rock cliffs, requires retaining walls 10 to 15 foot in height in average, with some locations reaching 20 feet in height. The cost estimate that we developed for that, I just want to just reiterate that these things are not exact in their nature. We're developing some reasonable conceptualizations of what could be constructed and putting numbers to them. So $700,000 is what we came up with. I still think that's a little bit low, but didn't want to be too liberal in that assessment under the circumstances. Want to be as real as possible with what we understand might need to be constructed. In parallel, the project traffic engineer determined that the traffic impacts of the proposed development on the surrounding transportation infrastructure are negligible. We've heard testimony that the hearings officer agreed with that. And improvements seemed disproportionate based on the scope and cost. The suggestion of my WDY's $700,000 estimate relates to standard improvements is not incorrect, or is incorrect. This was in relation to the 6-foot wide shoulder with a retaining wall. Given the circumstances after the hearing and the decision, I did go ahead and look at what it would cost to put a 12 to 15 foot wide pedestrian corridor on the north side. We would be widening the pavement on that side by 6 feet to get a 16-foot wide paved with a 12 to 15-foot corridor. Those numbers came in at 2.1 million, and that's, I still think, a little too liberal under the circumstances, but low, to be frank. The traffic engineer submitted another alternative design with the proportionality argument, including the cost
Excuse me, sir.
estimate for PBOT.
It would be really helpful to me to be able to read your testimony.
Okay,
So if you could please
Sure.
submit it, and it's obvious we're going to continue the hearing, so
Okay.
We will be sure to do that.
sure.
Thank you.
Do you want me to continue reading, or?
No.
You're
Okay.
out of time, but if you can give it to the clerk, then I'd actually prefer to read it too.
Okay,
frankly. It's gonna
that's
take
fine.
me a
And
little more time
I've
to
got the
digest
cost
it.
estimates
Good,
included.
great, fantastic.
I just want to reiterate that, these things are not exact. They're understandably conceptual, so.
Okay, good.
Do you have any?
And colleagues, while we are listening to the testimony, I believe we have 8 people signed up, 5 people signed up. Why don't you call the first 3 names, please?
First 3 names, Lisa Phillips, Ralph Phillips, and Ken Gunther.
And just to be clear, these are opponents of the appeal. Then the appellant, if they so choose, has 5 minutes for rebuttal. I would say it's nearly 100% likely that we will continue this hearing at the completion of that. I will stick around for a few more minutes so we can get through the emergency items on the afternoon agenda. We will need to pick a date, and I just want to prime you for the possibility that the only open date that we have in November is the day before Thanksgiving. So start thinking about that.
Mayor, I
I will be here
apologize
as well.
that I have to leave. I will, when we go back to the regular agenda, we'll just set over 972 and 973.
Yeah, I'll make sure we take
next-
care of
Next
that.
year, next week. And then if we're going to continue the hearing, I want to assure the appellant that all of us will have the opportunity to review the record before we come back. So my absence does not prejudice the proceeding.
Yeah, and I frankly would like to have a thoughtful discussion. I'm not sure after a 10-hour council day, that's necessarily the best time for us to really have a thoughtful conversation. So look, we'll absorb what we can today. We'll take the written testimony. We'll likely keep the record open. That's a decision.
Up to council if we
Okay,
get through the
We'll make
testimony.
that decision
Yeah.
later, and then we'll be able to approach this with full knowledge. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'd appreciate you giving me a little slack. I'm 92 years of age, and I'm going to try and speak clearly, but I'm a slower reader than average people, so
No
I
worries.
appreciate that.
We'll give you some.
Okay, I'm Ken Gunther, the family member that purchased the concerned property about 60 years ago. The calculated present value, considering purchase price and taxes, is about $2.5 million. That dollar amount is far in excess of the market value. Efforts to sell the site have been unsuccessful because of site conditions and approval complexities. The purchase cost and holding time costs have been financially destructive. The only way forward to recover even some of the $2.5 million is for us to develop the site as the proposal details. Our land use application has city staff, bureaus, and hearing officers' conditional approval. These are the city organizations and staff that you rely on for professional and expert advice. We have accepted the conditions of approval. However, there is one matter that warrants your consideration. This relates to the condition for street conductivity, which you heard about some, requiring us to construct a trail from Tangent to Broadway Drive. The hearings officer questions the creation of the trail. We join in that question because when the original street plat was created in the area, a dedicated street, Southwest Prince, was platted, connecting Southwest Tangent and Southwest Broadway Drive. Should the city earnestly want a trail from Tangent to Broadway Drive, it could be built on the Prince right-of-way through to the water tank property to Broadway Drive, if you wanted it. Subsequently, the city erected a Water Bureau tank fronting Broadway Drive. That event truncates the Southwest Prince access to Broadway Drive, thus obviating city interest in having street conductivity. Now, to require us to create a trail for conductivity purposes appears to be a disingenuous requirement, especially since it will be located in the environmental zone, which is designated to be undisturbed. So we've gone through all this rigmarole to create a 3.7 acre environmental zone, and now we're going to cut through it. Doesn't make sense. It would be an act of fairness on the part of the council to remove the trail requirement from the application. The benefits to the city of this project are significant. Increasing city housing inventory, close to location, can walk to downtown. I did it for many years. City utility fees, city construction fees, infill, annual property taxes of about $250,000. There have been 3 years of planning with city staff, bureaus, and our consultants, including numerous meetings with Swirl. During our last meeting with Swirl, a board member and a general member gleefully quoted their instructions to the attorney in this case. The instructions were, quote, to do anything to kill the project, unquote. The appeal by Swirl is suspect as to motive. They call to have the project rejected or to force us to construct a $700,000 to $2.1 million sidewalk to nowhere. The obvious motive is to kill the project.
Thank you.
All of the issues of the opposition emails, letters, and comments today were addressed in the development of the proposal with city staff, presented at the hearings officer hearings, and are mainly not relative to the specific issues before you.
Thank you, and I'd ask you to wrap it up.
I am. After 3 years of planning, about 5,000 hours of constructive interaction, about $400,000 in city fees, permits, and consultant fees, we have staff, concerned bureaus, and hearings officer conditional approval. We are at this point. We respectfully ask for your denial of the appeal and support for the project to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon.
I think I'll go next. I'll try to get some of your time back.
All right, thank you, sir.
I'm Ralph Phillips. I'm one of the owners of Gunther LLC. Lisa and I are the property owners. Lisa's father, Ken, purchased it many years ago, and then we've been the participants and have been the property taxpayers for all these years, personally for 20 years. As a city council evaluates this project, there's a lot of good aspects that I want to point out today. First of all, is we would like to build 20 townhomes. They're not luxury townhomes, as some of the opponents have said. They're consistent with the neighborhood. The PUD requires that, and that's how we designed them, and that's how they'll be built. They'll be consistent with the quality and the style of the neighborhood. Our project provides 3.3 acres of open space. That's open to the general public and obviously to neighbors. We have added a private community park on our site within our disturbance area. Good for the neighbors to walk their dogs, do whatever, or to walk around any of the 3 acres. We have a very small building footprint in our development, around 10% of the project. Typical projects in Portland, around 50%. So we're only disturbing that part of our building on a very small part of the project. From a disturbance perspective, we're leaving about 70% of the site completely untouched. 70% completely untouched. In terms of visual disturbance, only 2 or 3 neighbors will even see the property once it's constructed. Well, the city doesn't typically worry too much about parking. Our proposal, our project, will minimize any parking impacts. We have specifically designed it so that we have multiple cars for each site that will obviate the need for people to park on tangent or be impacted on their neighbors. Similarly, the traffic analysis that Mike talked about shows we have plenty of capacity on Tangent Street. The project will mitigate thousands of plants and will replace over 350 trees. Our project provides a buffer around the seep and ensures that it is maintained long-term. We've heard a lot about landslide risk through this entire process. What we've proposed relative to landslides actually decreases the likelihood of any landslide and actually takes all the water off of the project. I'd like to say one more thing before I wrap up, and that's we got lots of feedback on fire that we really weren't expecting from the neighbors from this go-around. I think the record should show, and the feedback from the commission officer is that we have approval from the fire. We have gone extra mile. We've added additional pipe to the facility, and it now meets the code. So it really doesn't ask for anything.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
I'm Lisa Phillips. I'm owner of Tangent Village Property and Genther LLC. I'm going to kind of wrap it up for all of us. You've heard from Ken on how we've worked with the city for 3 years to complete this special project that we really are very proud of. I grew up on Tangent Street. I walked Davenport to Ainsworth and to Lincoln High School. So we're really, really proud of what we've come up with. We've invested over $400,000 in the planning process in order to obtain the approval for our design and plans by all the city bureaus and the hearings officer. Ralph summarized the benefits to the city and the neighborhood, not the least of which is the minimal traffic and parking. We want to be good neighbors. We consider ourselves neighbors, not developers. We didn't just buy this land and now we want to develop it. Our civil engineer, you're going to be able to read his testimony. Mike, our traffic engineer, talked about the site distance challenges on Broadway and how the project really has minimal impact on traffic. Chris, our lawyer, presented a strong legal argument that there's only one issue remaining in this appeal. That's the north side of Broadway Drive. Considering the cost to literally move mountains, the north side improvements are not possible because of proportionality of the project or any other reasonable analysis. To sum it up, we support the city staff, which we really have appreciated working with, and the bureaus who unanimously recommended approval of this project, and the hearings officer who also recommended approval. Please deny this appeal from the Southwest Hills Residential League. Thank you.
Very good.
Just have a comment, and that is congratulations on designing a project which I heard minimal opposition from the neighbors, and I think when we look at it, it is a really careful use of the environmental zone and nicely done. So I think if we can just get this one sticking point figured out, you should be on your way.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Thank you, sir.
We have 2 more people signed
Very
up.
good.
Mickey Goodridge signed up on this one as well as the appeal, so I just want to make sure that he meant to sign up for both. Nope. Okay, we have one more. Sarah Hartung.
I pass. I misunderstood the sign-up sheet.
No harm, no foul. Very good. So if the appellant would like, they have the opportunity for a rebuttal for up to 5 minutes. Yeah.
Broke my leg this summer.
Oh, no.
So,
Sorry to
was
hear
sick
that.
For a long time, that happens.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's
My hips are
not
working just
comfortable.
slightly better than hers.
Keelan Nash, you get 5. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try and keep it short. Commissioner Udaley, I don't know if you remember Earl Blumenauer coming to class, and he has a wonderful quote. I probably don't have it quite exactly. We all have a PhD in our own neighborhood. We are all experts in our own neighborhood. So it is really funny for me to sit out there and listen to people with much higher degrees than I ever achieved tell me how people in my neighborhood are going to be walking or biking. Broadway Drive is like a bridge. And so if you imagine a bridge with gaps in it, it's very hard to calculate what the demand of that bridge is going to be because you can't really use it yet. Okay, so all of this traffic analysis tends to be, I mean, the standard is to do it based on cars. The problem is it's hard to calculate what the pedestrian and bike demand is going to be the way the road is right now. But I do want to point out that our map is correct. Those are existing sidewalks. You can get in Google Satellite and see them. And people right now, when you're going downtown, you do stay on that north side because there's that big segment of right-of-way that in front of the apartments that's used for parked cars, but people kind of move in between it. So there is the possibility, basically from the water tower all the way downtown is imperfectly walkable and has many sidewalks. And so I'll stop there, but I'll leave you with Representative Blumenauer's words of wisdom. We all have a PhD in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. For the record, Dan Cairns, representing Swirl. What the Phillips and Mr. Gunther said about how tough this project was to put together over the years, it's true. This is a really tough site to design, and I can see why they have been pulling their hair out over all these years. And they have, the big issues that they resolved and that we like a lot is they shrunk the footprint hugely, but they still maximize the number of units, and so still generates vehicle trips, and it still generates pedestrian trips and bicycle trips. And the hearings officer took that into account. He said, it's not much. It's 20 units, like a 20-unit subdivision, but still it generates, and they will impact Broadway Drive for that reason. So even though it's a tough site to develop, that doesn't mean that the city should subsidize a developer's frontage improvements. The city does that everywhere else. I mean, you don't have large developments in other parts of the city that can oftentimes have the put together projects and build out all the frontage improvements. But that's basically the best way to do that, is have developers do it, to make those improvements. And so because they couldn't solve the problems of Broadway Drive, they're not even gonna try and make it better. And that was basically what you heard their engineer saying. Since we can't solve these problems, it'll end here and it'll end there, and so we aren't gonna do it. And even their engineers spent all their time trying to crisscross back and forth on Broadway Drive. The hearings officer couldn't understand why people would cross Broadway Drive. And quite frankly, the ultimate way this will work, years from now, when these remaining gaps get filled in, you won't have to cross Broadway Drive, but you've got to start. You've got to be consistent in applying these code provisions. And if the suggestion is eliminate this pedestrian path down from the top, that's even more in the wrong direction. It was agreed to by the developer and required by the city as a replacement for a car connection, for cross connectivity. All right, we're not going to have cars do cross connectivity, we'll have pedestrians do it. That was a great idea. There are a lot of people who live, you've heard them, who live up there that would use this pedestrian pathway. There isn't a huge flow of traffic of pedestrians because it is so dangerous on Broadway. Your job is to make it better, even if you have to do it incrementally. And Mr. Kobach, the attorney, he does rely on those two cases. I'm not really sure why. Hill, for example, the big difference is in your findings that you adopted in the Hill case, you said the transportation system was safe for all modes and no mitigation was needed. That's why you lost the case. In this situation, the hearings officer said you would have to be nuts to go down there. It is not safe. The transportation system is safe except for Broadway Drive. So that tells you there needs to be mitigation or it needs to be denied until the mitigation can be provided. And the compromise that we suggested is a heck of a lot less expensive than full-blown code-required improvements. And I think it's cheaper than the estimate that their engineer has come up with.
Very good. And so let me just end on a note here. There is nothing that precludes the two sides from continuing to have discussions in the interim. I think everybody's sort of heard the conversation. You've heard our questions and some of the things that we have hinted at as being important. So I would obviously encourage the conversation to continue. I want to second what Commissioner Fritz just said. I didn't hear anybody come in and say, don't do the development. It sounds like that's not the problem. The problem is the question of the mitigation and the impacts on Broadway Drive, and for some people, tangent, and in a couple of cases, the question of the trail. So those really seem to be the focus of the questions. Then Commissioner Fish raised some of the legal questions, and he's very good at that part of the equation. And I, of course, rely on our legal counsel to advise us on some of those issues. So colleagues, obviously, I think we are at the point where we will set this over. We need to pick a date, and Keelan has a couple of proposals for us.
Shall we close the public testimony but keep the record open for comments?
Well, that was going to be my next question, but we can certainly take that up first. I mean, why don't we pick the date first, then let's talk about what we want to do with regard to testimony.
Sure. So the next available date we have is 9:45 time certain on November 27th. Commissioner Hardesty is absent that day.
Yeah, so we could actually keep the record open, because then if you do have some conversations and come up with something that everybody can live with, you can present it to us and we can put a bow on it.
Okay, well, first of all, is that date okay?
I had also requested an absence, but apparently it hadn't been submitted yet.
So there needs to be at least 4 of us, right? Three? Ah. I'm fine if it happens without me.
The next available date then would be December 4th, the following week.
Are we all there then?
Commissioner Hardesty is absent that day.
I'm in.
Yeah. It would seem wise to have the Transportation Commissioner here for such a focused discussion.
There's a 9:45 time certain and a 4 p.m. time
Let's
certain.
do the early one.
Consensus on that?
Let's do the early.
Not schedule anything else.
And we have no clock running, is that correct?
There is no clock.
Okay, and does that work?
December
with,
4th?
December 4th at 9:45 a.m.?
9:45.
Does that work?
We'll make it work.
Okay, good. So it sounds like we have a date then.
Do we want to set aside 60 minutes for that?
Yes.
Yes.
At a minimum, I would say 60 minutes, just to be, you put it in as 60. I'm sure we can do the conversation, the discussion. So Commissioner Fritz had put a proposal on the table that I think makes sense, which was we close the oral record, but we keep the written record open.
Until that continued hearing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that way, if the applicants they said that they heard new testimony and were concerned about that, you can submit rebuttals to the new testimony in writing as well. Could I just make a comment?
Please.
I really appreciate everybody being here today, the way people have focused on the application and its merits. I apologize that I cannot get to the Southwest Hills Residential League meeting tonight. I could actually get there, but then I can't get home because of the way the bus runs. So Cynthia Castro on my staff is going to come and talk to you about something. I appreciate that many of you have taken time off work to be here and have just nodded your heads that you will be here at 9:30 on a weekday. 9:45, thank you. And I very much appreciate that Southwest Hills Residential League, that used to be a dues-paying, non-member of the Neighborhood Association system, and decided to follow the standards and become fully, donations are accepted but not required, that you now have an Equity and Inclusion Committee, and that the evidence that was brought by the chair of that committee was data-driven from the city, showing, so you actually have been speaking for some of your neighbors who perhaps weren't able to be here on a weekday during the day, and I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so thank you all very much. This was I think, great testimony, great preliminary conversation. The hearing is therefore continued to December 4th, 9:45 a.m. Time certain. The oral record is closed. The written record will remain open to the time of the hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask as people filter out, if you could be relatively as quiet as possible, because I'm going to continue the council session. Could you read first read 972?
Amend Public Improvements Code to make requesting and participating in Bureau of Environmental Services administrative reviews more customer-friendly.
And if I heard Commissioner Fish correctly, you wanted that moved to next week, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so done. Please read item number 973.
Authorize the Bureau of Environmental Services to acquire certain permanent and temporary property rights necessary for construction of the Southwest Capitol Highway Stormwater Improvements Project number E10939 through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
At the request of Commissioner Fish, this item has been moved to next week as well. We have two emergency items. I would ask staff to be incredibly quick with these. We have three, sorry. Commissioner Hardesty.
Where we're starting?
He's right there.
969, 970, and then go to 973, 974, sorry, correct.
All right.
Good. All right, 969.
Amend a contract with TriMet related to the operations and maintenance of the Portland streetcar system to add payment to TriMet for operations, maintenance, and other services for FY 1920 through FY 2324 in an amount not to exceed $47,930,176.
Hello, can you do it in a minute?
I can. I'm Catherine Levine. I'm from the Bureau of Transportation. If you have any questions about this item, I'd be happy to answer them. This ordinance would authorize and continue our ability to repay TriMet for use of their light rail trained operators and technicians at Portland Streetcar. Basically, they provide the well-trained staff and reimburse them each year.
Very good.
And the 5-year authorization to pay TriMet is expiring.
That's correct.
So that just about covers it.
Very good. Any public testimony on this item? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
I'm sorry, I need to grab this.
Oh, yeah, if you could grab them all.
Sorry.
Go grab them all, Keelan, thanks.
Does anybody want
Does
to testify?
anyone here want to testify on this item?
Going once, twice, so.
Okay.
Ma'am,
Yes,
you have to go to your daughter's school.
I know I'm trying to get through this
We got one more
expeditiously.
emergency item and then,
We've got two.
oh, there are? Okay,
Mine will be 30 seconds.
okay.
I'm taking it nobody
No one's here
signed
to
up for
testify.
969.
Can we
No.
call the vote?
Call the roll.
New Daily.
Thank you, Catherine. I vote aye.
Fritz.
Thank you. Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye, thank you.
Wheeler.
I know more work went into this than we had time to discuss, so I appreciate your forbearance. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, 970.
Authorize the Bureau of Transportation to acquire certain permanent and temporary rights necessary for construction of the connected Cully Sidewalk Infill Project through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
What's the lowdown on this?
Morning, Mayor, or good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. So this agenda item gives PBOT the authorization to use eminent domain authority as well as offer just compensation for the Connected Cully project. And that's pretty much it. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Udaley, did you have any thoughts on this?
It will create safe and seamless pedestrian connections in a neighborhood with substandard transportation infrastructure, including new ADA-compliant corner ramps and driveway approaches where needed throughout the project area. This is Marty Maloney, right-of-way agent. Did we have any issues with this, remonstrances, or whatever?
We've let
Yeah.
we let all the property owners know that the affected property owners know, and we actually invited everybody to come to the council as well. And it'll.
Yeah, very minor.
You haven't heard any concerns?
No, everybody's actually in favor of this project.
Do we have anybody signed up who'd like
No
to
one signed up.
testify? All right, sounds like you did your job really well. Very good. Please call the roll.
Udaly.
Aye, thanks, Marty.
Fritz.
Thank you. Aye.
Hardesty.
I would have had a lot more, not questions, but just wanted to put stuff on the public record. I'll just say for the public record, we need sidewalks in color. Aye.
Wheeler.
Theme of the day, sidewalks. Thanks, Marty, for your hard work on this. Thank you, Commissioner Udaly. I vote aye, the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you.
Could we do, please, item number 974?
Extend benefits currently provided to eligible members of the Fire and Police Disability Retirement and Death Benefit Plan.
Commissioner Udaly.
Hardesty.
No,
I'm
sorry.
Hardesty. Hi, nice
Sorry,
to meet
yeah, nice to meet you too.
Good evening. As you may know, Senate Bill 507 passed the legislature, which added an additional benefit for fire and police retirement, disability retirement and death benefit plan. Sam is here. Thank you, Sam, for being here. You're a very patient man. You've been here a long, long time. We are required to pass this legislation, which is why it has an emergency clause on it. And Sam will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Welcome.
Yeah, Sam Hutchison, Bureau Director, FPDNR. Just real quick, the additional benefits were a presumption for post-traumatic stress and acute stress disorder claimed by police and fire. FPDNR is not part of the workers' compensation system, but this bill specifically said we have to cover it, so we have to update the charter through an ordinance to bring this into our plan, which is in Chapter 5 of the city charter. That's it.
Well done. Any further questions? Any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Please call the roll. Commissioner Hardesty, did you have a question first? Please call the roll.
Udaly.
Thank you. This is a really important issue. Happy to vote aye.
Fritz.
Yeah, I agree. Aye.
Hardesty.
Thank you, Sam, for your patience to be here all this long afternoon. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
Sam, the whole goal here was to make you an expert on land use. Yes. I hope we've accomplished our goal. Thanks for
What's
your
your
hard work
decision?
as always. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Colleagues, did you want to, I have to leave. Do you want to do the non-emergency item or should we just carry it over?
We've had
got
had
stuff
people
waiting for us.
yeah,
Let's do it.
Okay,
for
good.
hours.
I will
I get the
turn,
gavel.
I've turned the gavel over. If anything happens, it's no longer my fault.
That's right.
That's not how this works.
That's all right.
So the women are now in charge. Would you please read item 971, please?
Declare intent to initiate local improvement district formation proceedings to construct street, sidewalk, and stormwater improvements to Northeast Cooch Street from Northeast 97th Avenue to Northeast 99th Avenue, and to Northeast Davis Street from Northeast 97th Avenue to Northeast 100th Avenue in the Northeast Cooch Davis Street Local Improvement District.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Madam President. I apologize we couldn't come up with a catchier title for this item. This resolution initiates local improvement district formation proceedings and schedules an LID formation hearing as a prerequisite to beginning survey and design of the project. This will be the second pending LID in Gateway following formation of the adjacent Northeast 97th Avenue Phase 2 LID in April. As always, Andrew Abbey is here to give us all the details and more. Hope, maybe not all the details, just the most important details. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Commissioner Daly. Andrew Abbey, Local Improvement District Administrator. You may recall, I think we had the better part of a 45-minute discussion back in March. I didn't think I'd be too popular with council if we reran that this afternoon. This is really pretty straightforward. Keelan just passed out an amendment. We received some additional petition support, and I'm just requesting that council approve the amendment to incorporate the additional petition support into the record, which bring total petition support to 71%. And then if you approve the amended resolution today, then it'll come back in December. And then we'll talk in a little bit more detail back in December when we come back for final approval.
Do I need to read this into the record in its entirety, or?
No.
Okay.
I mean, the
just
city
need a
attorney
motion
can
and
correct me
a-
if I'm wrong, but you have the written memo on the amendments.
Do you want to move it?
Oh, I guess I will move my own amendment.
Second.
Thank you.
Been moved and seconded.
Call the roll.
You can call the roll if you like.
You Daly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Hardesty.
And then lastly, we have two people signed up to testify, one of whom is Larry Jackson. I'm pleased he was able to stay with us this afternoon. I did speak with Richard Perrine, and he had to leave. So he will not be testifying today, even though he's on the sign-up sheet.
Would you like to tell us what his concern is?
I've been talking to him on an ongoing basis, and he just had some questions about the timing of construction and all of that. We were able to get that answered, so.
He's not asking us to delay or vote no?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
And Mr. Jackson has been very patient.
That's right.
Would you like to come up? And...
Hey, come on, I'm the president. I get to
Oh,
say
I'm
that.
sorry, Madam.
Yeah, that's all
I'm sorry,
right.
Madam President.
I know. Honestly, one single item I get to be Madam President.
Commissioner Fish's.
I know, really.
You're in charge.
Welcome, sir. Thank you very much for staying with us. Just give us your
Thank
name.
you, Commissioners. My name is Larry Jackson. I'm with the Nehemiah Group, and we are a joint venture with the Gateway Project, and this LID represents the street improvements that are going into that development. And I'm thankful that we've gotten this far, and Gateway is an exciting project, and we're so happy to have the city behind us in what we've done thus far, and we're looking for that final, as he mentioned, in December. It's a project that's long awaited, I think, in the city. It's the last development this size that really incorporates what we're trying to do that's unique for the city, and I think will become a national model. It's a development for heavy minority participation and how to put the wraparound services in such a way to create a development that talks about cohesiveness and how we learn to live together in a small area. So I'm excited about what we can do and what will happen in this, when I'm looking for the city at this point to approve that LID. Thank you for your time.
How very kind of you to wait to say nice things. That's really great.
Madam President.
Yes, Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, so I love the beautiful words that you used, and I know that the city of Portland tries hard to live up to that vision.
Boy.
How are we going to ensure that Gateway really does benefit the people who currently live in Gateway? And of course, I live in Gateway, so I want to make sure that not just me, but my neighbors benefit as well.
I appreciate your comments concerning the people in Gateway, and we are interfacing on a regular basis. I went to a Park Bureau meeting 2 weeks ago. Just to talk about what concerns they had about Gateway, how do we incorporate all of those concerns about Gateway, and more importantly, I've been around this city for 55 years plus. I've been involved in city council meetings and this kind of stuff for 30-some years, and I'm happy to see the city finally really living up to some of those expectations about actually DEI. Diversity, inclusion, equity. I mean, that's stuff that we've talked about for a long time, but the city doesn't really know that much about. So to see them really all of a sudden getting to the point where it becomes a reality and a necessity is the reason really why I'm here. And I appreciate your concern for the rest of the neighborhood. You live there. I'm close by. I'm on Sandy Boulevard, so this is particularly of interest to me, and I share your concern.
Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to working with you and the city bureaus to make sure that this is just not a vision, but it becomes a reality.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's no further discussion, please call the roll.
Oh, this isn't an emergency.
It's a resolution.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's right.
You Daly.
Well, thank you for me as well for sitting through
Good to see you again.
entire afternoon, yeah. very excited about this project. Thank you, Andrew. Abby. I'm pleased to vote aye.
Fritz?
No, you call Hardesty next, because I'm the...
Because she's the
Oh, yeah.
president, yes, so
Pardon.
I'm just a commissioner at the moment.
Hardesty.
All bets are off right now.
Thank you both for your patience this afternoon. I vote aye.
Fritz?
I just love it, having a Madam President anywhere. So
Yes.
I'm glad that there are three of us who take turns having it.
Always fun to say.
It really is. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank
Andrew
you.
Abbey, thank you for your work. Thank you to Keelan and to Lauren and the security folks for being here all day. I'm surprised there hasn't been more positive press about this project.
I think you're going to see some coming down the pike now because we're so far down the conceptual part into the real.
Good.
And I'm excited about putting that out there.
I think that perhaps the title of the resolutions that have been coming, the forming of the local improvement districts, people don't quite get what
What's
it
going on
is.
there.
So if any reporters are watching this while having dinner, look into this project. It's been 20 years or more in the making, and it's a great one. So I'm very happy to vote aye.
And we're looking to involve the press a lot more now that
Good.
we're at this stage.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. And I don't like gaveling. I do like being called Madam President, but I don't like gaveling.
I like the gavel.